to me and state your name and address. Provide the context of your point. We may or may not answer it this evening, as is policy, depending upon what it is. But it's welcome. It's for anything not on the agenda. So as we go through the rest of the agenda items, please pay attention to that. We will, as usual, open up particular questions and answers as we come to different agenda items as well, as necessary. So after public comment, we have the consent agenda. Then we have reports. And when we move from reports, we'll move into some personnel-related stuff. We're going to have some new staff introductions by our principals of all the new wonderful staff that have joined the district. 3 of our new principals are going to present on their entry plans and their findings and where they stand, and there's going to be some follow-ups on some of those as well coming forward shortly. Dr. Milichewski will give us an update on his entry plan and where things are going and how things are going in that regard. We'll have a discussion as well about the district improvement plan and updates that might be necessary there. And then we will conclude the open session with the discussion on the forthcoming Arpa funds and how the school committee may want to advocate to use some of those funds. They will not all be ours, but we want to prepare ourselves and be ready for when the town has further discussions in that front. And then we will conclude by adjourning into executive session for minute review, not to return. So with that said, let's start with public comment. Is there anybody here who would like to speak in public comment? Mr. Brown.
I'm slow, but I get there. Good evening, thank you. My name is Bill Brown, 28 Martin Road. A resident of Reading since 1932. And I can tell you literally, we came into Reading in a horse and buggy. In 1893, the Town of Reading School Committee met with the Wakefield School Committee, and they hired a superintendent of the schools. Wakefield got 3/5 of the school, Reading got 2/5 of the school. I did a little research this afternoon before I come up here, and I find out that the new superintendent is the 12th, 2/5 superintendent, the newest superintendent. So I don't know how you figure that one out, but that's all right. As such, you are commander and chief of the Rockets, and when they kick off in this year, it'll be the 77th year of the Rockets. And I know you're going to hear a lot of misinformation out there, how the Rockets got the name. You're going to hear that it was from the water tower. It was not. You're going to hear it was from the Nike site. It was not. So I'm going to leave you, when I get through talking, I'm going to leave you a little thing they found in the 1945 yearbook. So it'll tell you exactly how the Rockets got their name. Yeah, man, that RHS ignited on September 23rd, left a red-hot trail of sparks through the stratosphere. And it would be a cute trick to keep them glowing again next year, but everything's ready and waiting, so good luck. Rockets in 1945, so this is for you, sir. And I'll give a copy to your principal, too, so he can give it to you later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thanks, Bill.
Does anybody else have any public comment before we move on? Mr. Haley?
Thanks, Tom. Chris Haley, 71 Tennyson Road. I just wanted to thank the school committee for your generous help yesterday with the dunk tank at the street fair. We were able to raise $1,186 through that for 625 Main Street, and then after 2 donations after the fact, we're up to $1,326. So without your help, So with your help, as well as others that I'll discuss tomorrow as well, it's very satisfying knowing that everybody played a role in what happened. Sean chased 200 balls down Gould Street.
As my hamstrings are reminding me.
Yeah. That's why I'm leaving after this, because I can't even stand right now. Tom, you embellished going into the tank a couple times with those little kids next to you. I know you were dunking them, but only that's for you to know. But I think the MVP of the entire thing was Ricky Shanklin, the principal of course, I forget as soon as Parker, yes. She descended upon Reading like Taylor Swift. It was just 5-10 minutes before she was scheduled to be there, there was a sea of 25 to 40 kids or whatever, and I couldn't believe the amount of people that were just standing there waiting, and she was a good sport throughout the whole thing, so definitely I appreciate everybody's time for that. And then hopefully next year, I'm passing it back to the Rotary. They let me take care of things this time around, so you guys are, off the hook until next time, unless they let me be a part of it, and then you're all back on the hook. So, thank you all again, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. I'll say this as well, Des, to add on to that. It was a fun event for, I think, all of us involved. It was fun to get dunked by a couple of our principals out there with their auto dunk. Yeah, I see you, Beth. So, it was a great event, and I also want to thank the staff who was able to come and participate as well and support and, for lack of a better way to say, represent Reading Public Schools out there. Many of them were there, present company, but also Mr. Martin, Michelle, who's over there. Everybody seemed to come by as well, so it was great to see the overall presence there. And I think the positivity is just, again, I'll say the word palpable. So I just want to thank you for pulling that together, and thank you, Aaron, for pulling our booth together as well. Little things add up, and I want to thank everybody for that. So, good. Any further public comment? Okay, we'll move on to the next portion of the agenda, and that's the consent agenda. Do we have a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
And a second?
Second?
Seconded by Carla. Is there any discussion or questions? Okay, seeing none, then all in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, and it passes 6-0. Okay, so we will move on to reports. We do not yet have a student. We're looking to you, Mr. Tracy, to help fill that gap. But we'll start, Dr. Milichewski, with your staff, and Jen?
Hi, good evening, everybody. One quick student services update. Tomorrow night at 7 o'clock in the library at the high school, there will be our first Special Education Parent Advisory Council meeting, the CPAC. Everybody is welcome. If you have questions about IEPs, 504s, any student concerns, and you'd just like to learn and make connections with other parents, you are more than welcome. We'd love to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we want to go to? We'll go down, okay.
Sure.
Susan?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Susan Bouton, and I'm the new Director of Finance here in Reading, and I am so pleased to be here. I had a wonderful day yesterday at the Reading Fall Street Fair, and I have been learning a great deal through meetings with our instructional leaders and our town and school colleagues. I'm really looking forward to being here and doing all I can to help serve the Reading community and our students.
Great. Sarah?
Good evening, everyone. I loved the intro about the Reading Rockets, and I will say the Reading Rockets have launched. We are on our way. Learning and teaching are happening in all of our classrooms. I've had a chance to visit and see it in action in our elementary schools, seeing lots of really great routine building. I was over at Birch Meadow, saw a fabulous math lesson where the teacher had the students already engaged in place value and mathematical thinking. So really impressive for within the first few weeks of school. The 7th grade team over at Parker had a really great game where they were having the kids learn about their teachers and also practice and talk about the important routines. When can you go to your locker? When can you go get your materials? Those things that are essential to the school day running smoothly. And recently had a chance to spend some time in the science classrooms here at the high school. I saw some phenomenal instruction today. Even got to be part of a physics lesson in Mr. McIntyre's classroom today. So I felt very lucky to be part of that. Just really impressed with the dedication of our teachers, the enthusiasm for instruction, and the engagement of our students. So we are off to a great start.
Great, thank you.
Hello, Reading community. It's nice to see you tonight.
I'd like to take a few minutes just to thank the entire community for all of the collaborative effort in getting our schools up and running. I think I speak on behalf of the entire team when I say it's really as smooth of an opening as we could have hoped for, and that doesn't happen by accident. I appreciate all the work of our school leaders, all of our staff, all of our educators for the amazing work that they've been doing to create this, as Sarah said, to launch the year, and really, I think, in an energetic, enthusiastic, and exciting way. So thank you, everyone, for all of your work. The highlight of, so we, as a team, went and visited all the schools over the past 6 or 7 days. The highlight for me was I walk into a first grade classroom. I won't name the school. The student says, hey, I know you. I said, okay, so I walk right over. He says, I really want to tell you something. I said, okay. And he said, well, first, I know who you are. You're the PTO president. That's great. And so he goes, I want to tell you that this is the best day ever. So there was just to see students across the board just, having, feeling good to be back in buildings, learning in what could be the most sort of normal as we can be conditions right now, is just really exciting for us and looking forward to a great year ahead. We know that one of the biggest challenges for us, it will be sort of how we navigate the challenges presented by COVID-19. You'll see that there's also just some, the dashboard has been updated to reflect some of the numbers of just how, what our cases have looked like in our schools. Want to quickly share that since September 1st, we've had 18 positive cases. So these are even students who didn't attend the first day of school because they were positive before September 1st. So 18 total students, 4 total staff. That has translated into 42 close contacts at the student level. We're happy to report that all 42, the families of all 42 students have opted into test and stay, and all 42 have remained tested negative throughout the 5 days of the testing protocol, which for us is an encouraging sign about just the value of test and stay and enabling students who are negative for COVID-19 in our buildings learning. So special thank you to all of our nursing staff who, in addition to their day-to-day jobs, are leading sort of this work around testing too. But very encouraged by just that protocol and how that's been rolled out. We've got a lot of questions over the past week around, our plan for pool testing, whether or not we can do test and stay for out-of-school transmission, all sort of in different layers and nuance of those questions. Director of Nursing Mary Juliana and I will be putting together just an FAQ document this week, which will be answering some of those questions that seem to be bubbling up. So be on the lookout for that in the next couple of days. But again, just really appreciate everyone's efforts to open our schools as successfully as possible.
Okay, great. We'll move on to liaison / subcommittee reports. Mr. Brandt?
No report.
Mr. Robinson?
Yes, thank you. So I'll first give the coalition report. Dr. Milichewski was there as well, and Principal Tracy. It was, we discussed the chief talked about the mental health position. That's kind of they're still talking about the job description for that. So they went over that. There was a lot of discussion on the renovation at the police station. So as you go in there now, there's that meeting room to the right. That's going to be, I believe, where the coalition staff is going to go, right, Tom? Yeah. And then there's going to be meeting rooms elsewhere, and I think they're moving dispatch out of the way so it's not right there when people walk in the door. So they talked about that. And Erica did mention that the results of the YRBS survey, she had just gotten them, I believe, that day, and she plans on sharing those, I think, with leadership. I think she said the 4th.
Yeah.
Oh, it's this week?
Yeah.
And then what else did we talk? Then we talked about the chemical health curriculum update. That's the if a student has a chemical health violation and kind of what they have to go through, that's been updated somewhat. And then the other thing that came up was the annual meeting, which is on the 25th, I believe, of September. So that will be a good night. That always is a good night. Now on to, if I can still have the floor for a minute, we had a recreation committee meeting last week, and we talked about there was a lot of discussion about a group that came forward that wants to put a community garden in town, and they want to use, I don't know who's familiar with Hunt Park, that there's a piece of land before you get to the playground. They want to put it in there. I think it was 8 to 12. I can't remember. Eric would remember. 8 to 12 spots there, and just kind of talking about that. It's a long-term thing, but it's a group of volunteers that just think it's a good thing, nice thing to do, so they're going to do it. The other thing, which took up most of the rest of the conversation, was Angela Binda, who's a member of the committee, talked about the financial forum and the discussion, and took exception, and rightly so, and as did the committee, to the fact that in the capital plan, there's a placeholder or something to fix the Imagination Station parking lot, and that wasn't the first priority of a survey that went out and that came from the committee, which was to put the kind of the center of the Birch Meadow area where the restrooms are going to be. So I told them, I said they need to get in touch with Bob and straighten that out, because, I mean, we've got to live by the priorities that people ask for, and if it wasn't the parking lot first, then we need to take care of that. So that's all I have.
Okay. Carla?
There's a Board of Library Trustees meeting as we speak, so I'll report on it next time, and you'll talk about the policy subcommittee.
Okay. Erin?
So we had our first meeting of the policy subcommittee last week with Chuck, Carla, and myself. We were very productive. We were able to get through 2 policies. I had to write them down though, JRA and KDB. So I believe we'll be, as a full committee, looking at those at our next meeting. And we are going to meet again on the 21st. I can't remember. I think it's JICH is the policy we're going to be looking at. As Jen mentioned, the CPAC is meeting tomorrow night for their first meeting. It'll be in person here in the library. So I hope people will come and check it out and participate. And as far as celebrations, I think the Fall Street Fair was a great success. So thank you to the Reading Rotary for bringing that back to life this year. It was just so wonderful to see the community all gathered together. And to reiterate what Tom was saying, it was so nice to see so many school staff as well. So I just thought it was a really wonderful event. So thank you to everyone who volunteered to help at our table. And
By the way, Chris didn't mention it, but I got dunked too.
you did. I saw you when you were soaking wet, so. I have to imagine that really happened. Yeah, so thank you everyone for your help with that.
Can I ask a quick question about this? So CPAC meeting tomorrow night, is there also a virtual option, or is it only in person for this next meeting? Do you know? Jen, do you know?
It's in
I
person.
believe it's just an in-person option for tomorrow night.
Okay. Other than that, no report.
No report? Okay, so just a couple of clarifying points for people, and so they can tie what was just said with our forthcoming agendas. The coalition's annual meeting is the 29th, which is a Wednesday. It'll be here, right in here, in the library here, as far as I understand. That's one thing. The YRBS survey data, Erica is coming to present to the school committee on the 14th of October. So that will be forthcoming in our regard as well. And to comply with the policy on policy adoption, but it's also policy amendment the way it's written, we will distribute copies of the 2 amended policies to the entire committee at least a week in advance of that meeting on the 30th. And then we'll make, of course, that public in the packet as well. So those are a couple of the logistical updates there. In addition, just so I don't forget, since I'm already down there, you all should have seen some pretty significant updates to the calendar when it comes to the end of September and early October. Now that we've kind of settled out with regards to town meeting, which is no longer on the 27th of this month, we no longer have back-to-school night for the high school on the 30th, and everybody seems to like Thursday meetings over Monday meetings. Our next meeting is the 30th of September instead of the 27th of September. And to spread some meetings out and allow things to work appropriately as well, the meeting after that is now October 14th, which is also a Thursday. So we're trying to get a little bit back to the Thursdays as everybody's asked, but there are some changes there to try to make everything work from a calendar perspective, okay? With regards to the question about CPAC and its remote participation option, that is a current limitation of the room, and it's a topic of discussion as we work through it. There are some other more pressing needs from a technical perspective to support the school, and the students and their computers in particular, and making sure those get rolled out as they come in. So once that gets handled, then we can get the IT staff to work on making sure we have the bidirectional speaker system and all that stuff that's necessary here for such a system to work. So that is in process, and we'll have some further conversations on that as time goes. One other policy conversation there, and especially with Mr. Tracy in the room. The other one, I believe, is IKF, Aaron, the graduation policy. And that one in particular, we've talked about focusing as a result of the handbook review last year was in particular on Mass Core and the health curriculum names and stuff like that, just cleaning that up. We might come back and look at that more holistically at a later point in time, but that was one of the other items that's coming forward. Okay. Anything else on the reports from anybody else? All right. Let's move into the next section of the agenda, which would be personnel action and the new staff introductions. There we go. Yeah, or you can go there, whichever one you want. Either one works for us. I like you back here, that works.
All right. Well, one of the exciting things about a new school year is the opportunity to welcome new staff to the Reading Public Schools. And this year, we welcomed so far about 84 new staff, so it's quite an accomplishment. We did start this summer with a 3-day staff induction, which was a really great 3 days of starting to get to know our staff, supporting them, onboarding them. And so we offered some important trainings for them during that time, and also time for them to get their technology, get logged into email, so that they were ready to go that first day with students. That was our goal. So first, this is our new staff in central office. As you know, there are a lot of us. And we purposely tried to pose in a funny way, because we really do believe, all of us, that we're doing joyful work. Work of educating students is joyful work, and we try to have a good time. Even though it is serious work and hard work, we do actually laugh a good amount and try to bring joy into public education. We think that's important. So this is our new central office staff. This is a look at some of the new staff here at the high school. It's not quite everybody, but great photo up front. We love that mural in front of the school. Here's a list of everybody. I'm not going to read it for you, but I want to just point out that when we're talking about new staff, I think sometimes people jump right away to thinking just about our content teachers, and we certainly have hired that. You can see math teachers, Spanish teachers, but we've also hired a good amount of support staff and other professional staff that are imperative to providing a well-rounded and full education for our students, such as guidance counselors, a new fine and performing arts chair. And so the people that we're welcoming into our district this year really provide us that well-rounded ability to support the needs of many students and all of the wonderful programs that we're able to offer. One new staff member at Coolidge, and their principal, Martian, hopped in for a selfie, so her staff member didn't feel lonely. That's great. Parker as well had only a few new staff members coming in. And we have one new preschool teacher joining our RISE team as well. Barrows has a few staff as well. Again, a variety of staff coming in different roles. And I also want to mention, you may notice, a number of our new staff are paraeducators. And that is a role, along with our tutors, that are essential to us really providing the supports that our students need and ensuring that we're able to intervene when needed. Awesome. Joshua Eaton has some fabulous photos here as well. You may notice at the elementary level, we were hiring some additional specialists in the area of music and art. It's exciting that we believe those programs are essential for our students as part of their education here in Reading. And here's Principal Burnham posing with his new staff as well. Love the selfies. And our newest Killam koalas, posing again with Principal Levesque. So again, a variety of staff coming into the Killam School to support our students there. And finally, our new Wood End staff, a number of tutors, teachers for some of our special education programs joining us. Excellent. So at this time, I know we have some of our new staff here with us in the audience. I don't want to embarrass them, but would you mind standing just so we can recognize you and welcome you, officially welcome you to Reading? Thank you for coming out. I think we did maybe want to have a quick photo op with school committee.
We're happy to do so. We'd love to have you come up for a photo op if you don't mind.
Quick photo op.
Come on, you
Come on.
Stand around.
And I
Yeah,
think,
we'll stand.
other like new staff as well, central office and.
Yeah, let's slide out in the front here because there's not much room in back, so we'll slide out in the front.
We'll call you out, Mr. Burnham, Dr. Burnham, Mr. Martin, Mr. Tracy,
You
Michelle.
want me
go on
to
your-
take the picture? How about that?
Michelle, you got to get out here. You're part of this too, right? Who's got the camera?
I got it.
Susan, you got to come out too. Tom, you're like center, right? Because you're the tallest. Come on, Caleb. Susan, step down and then we can tighten it in. There we go. You gotta pose like serious and then a funny pose, right?
All right. We scooch in just a little bit. I have you all this, but it's far away. Okay, perfect. And you want to do a funny one now?
Funny one, come on.
All right, on
Come on,
count
do it. Do
three.
something.
1, 2, 3. Awesome. Thank you all very much. Welcome.
Thanks.
Photo taking skills.
Yeah, you're so
We haven't reviewed the photo yet.
I was just going to say, don't think that it's great because it's far away. We might need some editing.
Well, they're already moving out, but, you know, I don't know about everybody else, but I noticed, like Sarah, like you mentioned, all the different types of staff. And the focus and improvement on some of those areas that we've talked about for a long time. Team chair, team chair, team chair, guidance counselor, you know, et cetera, as you go through that. Tutor, all the different, rounding out the educational, you know, supports and everything else. So thank you for all the work that is necessary there. I know we've got a few more to fill, right, Michelle? You've only, you know, the first couple of weeks was 66, I think was the number, so I'm sure you've incremented that number by now, but, and we, you know, we've shared the posting on our page. I know some individuals have shared the posting as well to help, you know, drum up some support and get some more people coming in, so I think we're excited. Yeah, go ahead.
Just want to share two follow-up comments too. Just first is a thank you. For those who don't know, Michelle Roach, our new HR director, working tirelessly behind the scenes in front of, to fill, 84 positions and then some coming, while she's also learning, sort of getting a lay of the land in the district. She has jumped in with, 2 feet running into the role, and I think has really thrived and been instrumental in getting us up and running. So I appreciate the work that Michelle is doing, and also thanking everyone else behind the scenes, especially Kristen Cohen in central office, just does not receive the recognition she deserves for everything she's doing to bring hires from, recruitment all the way through to final signing. So thank you to Kristen and Michelle and everyone else on the team who played a role sort of in getting us here, getting the staff here. I also want to make one point too. I've made this point in a couple of different contexts, so I apologize if you heard this before, but I like to say we have the new staff coming, is that we are really, really excited about the new staff, and we also recognize they're joining a really, strong force of educators already in the district. We know there's a lot of conversation about a lot of new, and yes, that's true, but also there's a lot of returning people who know the district really well, who have been doing really, really good work in Reading for a long time. So just wanted to make sure, as we celebrate and recognize the educators who are coming in, who we're very excited about, also want to recognize the educators who have been in the district for such a long time. And we feel like that obviously bringing in some exciting new staff with sort of staff who have done it really well here in Reading is a great combination for us moving forward. So just want to thank not only the new staff, but also the staff who have been here. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments on the new staff from the committee? Anything out there from the audience? No? Okay, then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the new principal leadership entry plans. So, Dr. Milichewski, how do you want to start it?
Thank you, and I think that builds off my last point. I am extremely excited about the group of principals that we have in our district. I think one of the things that I learned very quickly is that we have a really strong group of principals across all of our schools, and also feel really excited. I think we were able to bring in three leaders who have a track record of success, who are also really excited to be here and to be a part of the Reading community. So what you're going to hear tonight is you're going to hear an overview from each of them, just in what they're saying, a very informal, low-key way of some of the things that are on their mind as they approached entry, just for about 5 minutes, and then you're going to hear, welcome to have any questions from the community or from the committee towards them. This will follow a similar form for those of you tuned in last time to, for Michelle, Curtis, and Sarah's entries. And I'm also going to make one note too, is that my expectation, our expectation for the principals is that they will share out their entry plans sort of in the way they are now, and then report their findings to sort of their own school communities and hear sort of a little bit of what they learned. We're also asking that Mr. Tracy will share out his findings sort of publicly in a school committee meeting in a couple of weeks, most likely in the beginning of October, the October 14th meeting possibly, given that all of the students in Reading are either at Reading Memorial High School or will go through sort of RMHS. We thought it was important to give him the opportunity to see about where he feels from what he's learned the community is, and also where the district's going. That's a little bit of lay of the land on entry plans, but would love to bring them up and each give them a chance to share. We told them no PowerPoint, just low-key, what's on your mind. We didn't go through who's going first, so whoever wants to jump up tonight first. I see them doing rock, paper, scissors. Don't bat looking, Ricky's not here, she's our rock, paper, scissors champion.
Kevin's always second, so.
He's always second. So we'll start with Mr. Tracy.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Before I begin, I need to give a quick shout out to our boys soccer team for their 4-0 victory over Wilmington Wildcats this afternoon. It was a decisive win. I cannot be happier to be exactly where I am. And to be given this opportunity. The warm welcome has really been a little overwhelming, but I must say I'm very grateful. I'll be back, as was just mentioned, for a more comprehensive presentation with the entry plan, but I'd just like to say a few comments about the opening so far here at Reading Memorial High School. I'm incredibly proud of my colleagues, both in leadership as well as my immediate colleagues at Reading Memorial High School, really for their strength and courage. I of course, was not here last year. However, we all know that last year was an incredibly challenging year for all of us, in education and otherwise. And the staff at Reading Memorial High School came back this year ready to go. Their positive energy was infectious. You could tell they were all in on the students for day one. And I must say, just coming from an outside perspective, the fact that they were able to muster all the positivity, thankfully after what was hopefully a re-energizing summer, has really started us off on a great foot. For me, it's been a wonderful start since July 1st. It, of course, culminated when the staff and students arrived. But over the summer, I need to give credit to the central office, as well as to the school committee, for setting what I feel has just been an incredibly positive tone, supportive tone, pre-K-12, really bringing continuity and some cohesiveness to the team, and just very excited to be part of it. This set the stage for us to be ready to open. And there are a few things that I need to say that I really, they may go unnoticed. Things such as our superintendent, for example, or our human resource director joining us on Friday evening for the football game. One working, the other with the family, cheering our students on. The energy, if you were at that game, or if you were at the volleyball game last week, or the girls' soccer game last week, the energy is palpable, I think, as Mr. Wise said. But what I really have been impressed with is the students coming out and supporting one another, and the staff doing the same. You know, at RMHS, we began with our freshman orientation, led by the most part from our Rocket Ambassadors, who are an absolutely outstanding group of students. From there, we've been off and running. The staff been focused purely on students, but I will say mostly on welcoming them back and building a strong relationship, as we all know from last year. And of course, 50% of our students at Reading Memorial High School have not stepped foot truly in Reading Memorial High School. So part of our challenge this year was to make sure that every child, when they came in, felt safe and welcomed. There was a real focus on transition, on routines, not only for our 9th graders, but also for our 10th graders as well as our juniors. We've found that, and I said this to the juniors in our opening class assembly, a lot of attention has been given to our freshmen, sophomores, certainly to our seniors, deservingly so. But for me, I really want to also focus on our juniors, because as all of our students have had a great deal of loss and missed some wonderful opportunities at a high school, I want to make sure that this year is as positive as it can be, and that we make sure that the kids have as typical of a high school experience as we could possibly provide. I mentioned before, our extracurricular activities and athletics are in full swing. I think these are things that, quite frankly, I often took for granted. Working in schools and feeling kind of the going to musicals, concerts, the things that we generally do and that we all enjoy together as a community, we've been without. This year, we're not. And so far, I will say that alone has really brought together a sense of community across the high school, but I truly believe across the town as well, because I have felt the community support. As it always is, our priority is, of course, on the students. I mentioned before, have a high school experience as typical as possible. I'd be remiss, however, if I did not thank my staff. Our smooth opening at Reading Memorial High School is truly a credit to our staff, to our teachers, to our counselors, to my department chairs, to my main office, to my 2 assistant principals, to my athletic director. And honestly, I sit back and I just am very grateful that we have such a fantastic team. I'm excited for this school year. We have our challenges. When I look at the entry plan, part of my work was, let's get to know the school and the community as much as I can, as fast as I can. Because quite frankly, and I've heard this feedback from staff did not want me to come in and say, well, let's just wait a year. We have plenty of work to do, and I look forward to coming back and sharing some of that work with you. But I need to say that the survey that the staff completed, all of our entry-level meetings, my many conversations and observations, last week, and I say this knowing full well that my schedule will soon probably overtake me, but I had the great pleasure of being in 28 different classrooms. And throughout those classrooms, and the observations and the survey, the good news is we're not a perfect school. And I say that knowing full well that collectively we have work ahead of us. But the good news is, at its core, we have some unbelievable strengths. And I'll just share, while we go into a deeper presentation later, some of the strengths that have come out of the entry plan thus far. Not surprisingly, when you ask staff, what do you think the greatest strength is in a school? The students, of course. Now, I would say students are wonderful everywhere, but there is a little piece of me now that understands that there's something very special about the students at Reading Memorial High School. Whether it's positive and they're respectful, the fact that I have students coming up to me all day long and introducing themselves and shaking my hand. That's not typical in high schools. But to me, it speaks to kind of our general values here, whether or not it's respect and responsibility, but that we truly are all in this together. And I've gotten that sense since we began this September. I would say our greatest strength is our talented and dedicated staff. This week, we've already had some challenges, and I've had the opportunity to work very closely with staff in support of the kids. Our counseling department, which I will mention, there was a question in the survey that said, things you never want to change. And the top answer was our counseling department. Under Lynna Williams, our counseling department has done simply an outstanding job transitioning from last year into this year, but making sure that not only are individual students taken care of, but that we made sure to also, we're going to implement social emotional education for 9th and 10th grade for the next 9 to 10 weeks, pushing into our flex block. And that's really a credit to the counselors. I mentioned before, our department chairs, their support and leadership has been invaluable. We have a wonderfully robust extracurricular activities, athletics. From my sense so far, we have a good balance between our academic rigor and our creative outlets for kids. We are certainly well-resourced, thank you to the community. And I also feel, as I mentioned before, that incredible support. We have plenty of ways in which we need to improve, but I'm excited for that. I think for me, getting the staff together in person and being able to tackle some of the problems that they've seen, I'm really excited for that work, and I'm excited to share it back. The one thing that's a little strange, of course, we're all wearing masks. One thing you can't see is that I'm smiling from ear to ear. And I have been. I have been for the last month and a half. Truly have been very, very special. Not everything is always easy in this position, but it helps when you're surrounded by really good people. So I thank you very much. Any questions, I'd be happy to answer, general or otherwise. And again, I'll be coming back with a more comprehensive report.
Is there any committee questions? Chuck, it looked like you were going to have one.
No, I just wanted to say thank you. Yeah, that was
We'll echo that, thank you.
Yep. Great. Thank you.
Yep. It was great to see you at the football game on Friday as well.
Yeah, it was nice being
having fun with those students, trying to keep them in line, but
The students were very well behaved. Well, we got Barnstable this Friday night.
thanks, Mr. Tracy. Yep. Oh, go ahead, Chuck.
So, you know, it's funny, you said nice to see. I had two older residents who are always at the games came up to me after the game and they said, we saw the new high school principal, they were thrilled, and we saw the superintendent with his family. So that's nice, you know, that you know, you're trying to be part of the community, and that's important to a lot of people. So thank you for that. I know that's your Friday night, so.
Mr. Burnham.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having me here tonight. And I am so happy to be starting my very first year as principal of Birch Meadow. And similar to Mr. Tracy, I have to give credit to how the years went to the incredible staff that I'm working with. It's something I learned very, very quickly, that the staff at Birch Meadow is incredibly professional. And you saw from the new staff selfie that I took, there's not a lot of new staff. There's a few, but a lot of the people there at Birch Meadow are veterans, and they have a strong group of people there, and that's really helped me out as I've started. I'd like to start my presentation tonight with just a few phrases. Teamwork, resiliency, flexibility, forgiveness, perspective, connections, and grace. When I've done my meetings with family members, faculty members, and community members, those have been the most consistent words that they've used to describe the Birch Meadow community. I've certainly taken note of those words, and as I've watched the Birch Meadow open up this year, there is no doubt that I've seen every one of those qualities on full display. I started the year with a series of meet and greets with families and caregivers and faculty, sometimes in individual meetings, sometimes with play dates scheduled by the PTO out on our playground, and even a trip into Boston to meet our Reading students who lived in that city and some of the surrounding areas. As we transitioned back to in-person learning, our health staff and our maintenance staff did an absolutely amazing job of helping me develop protocols and making sure the facility was ready and safe for in-person learning, and to hopefully keep things in person as long as we can. So far, we've had a lot of great success with that, and I'd like to list a few of the things that we've successfully done in person and are planning to do in person, hopefully in the next few months. We were able to offer a curriculum night in a manner which allowed people who wanted to visit the school in person to do so, and yet also gave families the option to stay home if they felt safer doing that by viewing presentations remotely. We've been able to structure our annual book fair in a manner that has allowed it to be in person for students for the first time in 2 years. So they were very excited today to be carrying out their books. And we're in the process of scheduling numerous in-person enrichment opportunities that we're planning to hold outside. How to make mistakes and the secret of kindness presented by the Ooch experience. Instead of taking the bus to Plymouth Plantation, we're trying to have Plymouth Plantation come to us and set up their Wampanoag Village right on the playground. Wingmaster's Live Birds of Prey experience. Historic New England's American Revolution presentation. The Lowell Mills Industrial Revolution experience. Science presentations by the Discovery Museum, and the SAFE program by the Reading Fire Department. I know while many of our enrichment programs are still in the works, I'm confident that by working with our incredible PTO and the members of the Reading community, that we'll be able to have a lot of them in person right on the campus of Birch Meadow itself. So now you might be wondering what I've learned about the Birch so far and what my plans are for the next few months. So let me answer those questions for you. I've learned two main things. The first one is that I have a lot to learn. This is my first time as an elementary school principal, and every day I'm learning new things. The second is this. The Birch is made up of an incredible group of faculty, students, families, caregivers, and community members who are 100% invested in the school and want to be involved. As I continue to spend time meeting them, I can sense their sincere excitement and how much they want to collaborate as a full, diverse community with a shared goal of educating our children. Along those lines, one of the things I've started exploring is how we might be able to incorporate restorative circles in what we do at the Birch. Some of you may have heard of restorative justice, which is the back end of restorative practices, whereas restorative community building circles are the front end and are designed to strengthen the connections between people. A lot of this is based on my doctoral research, which I'm bringing to the Birch, and I was struck by what the research said about the power of connections. Simply put, a connected student is a successful student. The research indicates that a student's level of connectedness to school was a more accurate predictor of success than socioeconomic status, class size, achievement scores, cultural background, or gender. It's the single most accurate predictor of student success that we have. So my hope is to bring restorative circles to the Birch as a way to foster those connections, give students the skill to find their voice, and give students the skill to hear others' voices. The great thing about circles is that they can be used at any level, and potentially at some point, it's something that can be shared across schools and across levels, and at any point in time that you want me to run a circle for the school committee, that would be a blast. So with that, I thank you, and if there's any questions, I'm absolutely happy to take them.
Chuck?
You beat me to, I was actually going to ask, and with permission of Dr. Milic, I'd love to come and see that, one of the restorative circles.
That'd be great. Absolutely reach out to me, and we can set something up. I'd love that. And I'd love to have the school committee in to do that with me, and I'd love to come to you to do one, so you can see it. We could do it all together. You just let me know.
The other question I had was, when you were describing the school, you used the word grace. There's the last, can you just talk about in what context that came up?
Absolutely. I can talk about it on a personal level, how I've witnessed it, and how people have described it to me. And on my own, as you can imagine, being new to the Reading community and being new in my role, I'm making mistakes left and right? So people are forgiving me and showing a lot of grace when I walk right through it, and really helping me figure things out. And the fact is, the situations evolve right now rapidly. So we're all making mistakes. And treating each other with kindness and caring about each other and showing grace during those circumstances is a powerful message to kids. And so I've really seen the faculty embracing each other even as mistakes are being made, and being kind to each other and role modeling that at all times. I think that's been probably the most specific way that I've seen the word grace in action at Birch Meadow.
Thank you, that's great to hear.
Any other committee questions? I have one, Steve. This restorative circles thing, I'd like to hear that. How would you compare and contrast that versus the open circle curriculum that's at the elementary? Is it part of that? Is it something else, augmentative?
I'm glad you asked that, because my understanding is that Open Circle as an organization is no longer funded, and so we can't get support from Open Circle anymore. So as I've run restorative circles with the staff at the Birch, I've been asking them, because I've never done Open Circle before, I've been asking them, is there crossover from this? Is this something that we can use now that Open Circle is not operating the way it always has? And most of so I can't tell you personally, because I haven't done Open Circle, but most of the feedback that I've gotten from them is that there are similarities. They're not 100% identical, but that there are some similarities with it so that we could keep using that time in that basic circle formation, to be able to build on it. And I think that restorative circles, they really translate no matter where, because you can make them very simple, for younger children, or you can make them very complex all the way up for adults. So it's something that really kind of, I think, can build off of that experience that staff have with Open Circle and push to something even bigger.
Great. Thank you for that. That news on Open Circle is, I think, news to many of us. I had a lot of people going, huh.
I think
Jen wanted to say something real quick.
Understanding Disabilities funded that, didn't they?
I think it's a greater organization question.
So actually, we're aware of it. Sarah and I have actually had conversations. We've actually talked to Steve about this. We can still use the materials we have. It is something we are using this year because they just became defunct. But our plan and one of our action steps as related to our district improvement plan is actually to have a new curriculum to pilot next year. And so you will be hearing more about that as this was new information that came to us at the end of the school year.
Okay. Well, I think this also gives us an example of something where you can try something at one school. If it's successful, potentially roll it out to other schools, right? And I like the vertical side of that too, which we never really had with Open Circle, right? Open Circle was contained to the elementary side. You really you had different attempts at the middle school level and yet different attempts at the high school level too. So if this one thing could go vertical, that could be very interesting. And it also sounds like it's not necessarily a curriculum as much as a mode of operation, for lack of a better way to say it. So that could be interesting from a training perspective, that perspective, but also other savings, for lack of a better way to say, from a curriculum cost perspective. So I'll be interested to hear more about that, Steve, as you go through that.
Can't wait to talk about it.
Great. Any other questions from the committee? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
All right, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Awesome. So first of all, thank you for this opportunity. It's great to be here after the Reading Fall Fair, where I helped to dunk Mr. Wise with my mentor, Beth Riley. I'm coming right now off of our Joshua Eaton, our family picnic event, where we had, our backyard was filled with families and ordered pizzas and had slush, and it was just a great kind of welcome back. We missed you, Aaron. So I wanted to just kind of open up by sharing. I know you've all seen my entry plan. I spent this summer having one-on-one meetings with staff and families, and I was just blown away. And the night that I had sent out that email to my staff, I got 27 replies. And by the end of July, I had met with 90% of teachers, paraeducators, all staff members at Joshua Eaton. So I think, just right off the bat, learning how engaged this community is, and, coming in and sharing their ideas and their experiences from teachers and staff members who it was their first year coming to Joshua Eaton, to a staff member who's in her 39th year of teaching this year. And so I just feel extremely lucky to be a part of a community that, has so much rich history and experience at the school. I spent a lot of time hearing about the Veterans Day Assembly, which we're thinking about creative ways to bring that back, the Halloween Hallow, just different events that have really helped to make Joshua Eaton a really special place to be. Upon sharing out my entry plan to families, this summer, I had the opportunity to meet with 34 families who came in one-on-one. Some brought their students, which was great to kind of check in and chat. And really, they were excited to just talk about their students, their hopes and dreams for them this year and beyond. And it was a great sort of touch point. In my first Jaguar Tracks, our weekly family newsletter, I shared a goal to learn 100% of our students' names within the first month. I will say that with masks, I think it's like double the amount of people, because I spend my lunch times in the cafeteria, and I'm going through and trying to learn everyone's name and meet everyone. And then I see them in their classroom with their mask on, and one day they have a Yoda mask on, the next day it's different. So we're getting there, but they're definitely holding me accountable to that goal. I think so far what I've learned from the community is, number one is just the connectedness to the school from people who are willing to step in and support in different areas, to teachers sharing different ideas of things they want to, pilot in their classrooms, or approaches to teaching. There's a lot of excitement and energy at Joshua Eaton. And I think it really kind of culminated on my first day, where I said to my mentor, she said, when you're finished with the arrival, once all the students are in the building, it's just going to be calm, and you're going to say, I did it. And I walked through the hallways of the third, fourth, and fifth grade, and every classroom was sitting in a circle, learning each other's names. I went down to the K1 and 2 classrooms, and same thing, just that community, the sense of, caring, I think is very strong at Joshua Eaton. But I think, as moving forward, it's still early to make any claims about, where we're at. I'm still in a process of learning. I think I'm going to be learning all year long. even from the day-to-day around, how we've done certain things in the past and which way we're entering the cafeteria and things of that nature. But it's really, I feel extremely lucky and supported by the community, from our staff members, our front office, our central office, district community, and I'm looking forward to many years ahead of work at Joshua Eaton. So I'm open to take any questions and excited to see you all in our school this year.
Thank you, Caitlin. Anybody have any questions? I'll ask this to you and Mr. Burnham as well. I mean, you both are in schools that are particular for a program, for one of our special education programs. How is that education process going for you in terms of the constituents of students, the parents, and you're learning about the program, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities for improvement, very similar to what we did at the offsite. How are things going in that process?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, I met with our program staff this summer, met with our families and our students, and I spent some time today checking in on the classroom and seeing how it's going. I think our program staff, we started this during the in-service days, where one of our lead teachers gave a presentation to the entire community around, what our program is, some vision. She had worked in collaboration with Jen Stice and other teachers across the district. I think at initial kind of look is we're feeling a sense of alignment with the schools based on that process this summer. Our lead teachers and staff members are extremely tight. They know the students really well, from the students' history to, what their strengths are, where they're hoping to grow, their siblings, their parents. And I'm feeling a very strong sense of connection and looking forward to just seeing how that grows throughout this year and working with the teachers to identify the areas of improvement.
Great, thank you. Steve, do you want to take a shot too?
So very similar to what Caitlin said, I've been fortunate to inherit a great staff that works in the program at the Birch, and in particular, an extraordinary team chair, Jackie Payton, who knows that program very, very, very well, and has helped me kind of watch it, observe it, and see how it works. Now, I do have some experience working with programs like this. As some of you know, I've worked out of district at some special ed collaboratives, and I've worked a lot of my career in special education, so I have familiarity with this particular program. And my observations of it, that staff is very, very sold on the idea of working with a strength-based curriculum. They build on the strengths of the kids, and then they use those strengths to move in some areas of weaknesses where the kid can build some more skills. And that's been an absolute pleasure to watch, and they're incredibly skilled at doing it. So,
great, thank you so much. Any other questions? Thank you, all of you, and your mentors that are here to support you as well. Thank you for coming. We appreciate that, and we appreciate the support you're providing them. So thank you so much. Okay. With that said, we'll move on to an entry plan update by Dr. Milichewski.
Principals, you're all set too. You're welcome to stay, but you're also.
It's a good football game on tonight.
Thank you.
Good night.
Tom, do you want Kevin to stick around for the ARPA conversation?
Kevin and I have been sort of in Zoom over that. I can move him in. He's had a lot of late nights, I think.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, well, that was exciting for me to also be able to hear from some of our leaders and how they were approaching entry. And, we've had many conversations about that and how it aligns with how we've been approaching, Sarah and I entry, and now Susan as well. So tonight, I'm going to share a little bit of just some of the things that I have learned from, now 2.5 months into the role. And as on the July 22nd school committee meeting, I came out front just to share a little bit about my plan and what I was hoping to learn. And tonight, I'm just going to share a little bit of a high level of what I'm taking away. What I don't want there to be is all of a sudden I'm, spending these couple of months trying to learn, and then on January, here's some surprises of things we didn't talk about along the way. So I just in broad strokes want to share just sort of where I'm at with my entry. As I shared on July 22nd, some of the broad goals of entry include building relationships with stakeholders across the community in all different roles. And in those sort of conversations as I build relationships is trying to deeply understand what are the strengths of the district, what are the challenges facing our district, and what do people see as the opportunities to move us forward. So as I build relationships through connections and meetings, it's also trying to deeply understand the community. I'm hopeful that as I share things out, that it helps develop amongst us a shared sort of understanding of where we are as a community, and that will be the foundation of where we're going in the future. So again, this spring, going to take what I find as and through my entry, calibrate that with everyone in the community, and again, use that to collaboratively develop a strategic plan moving forward, or refine our current strategic plan, depending on what the entry plan sort of yields. Walk through just the different phases of the entry plan. As you see right now, I'm in phase 2, which is listening and learning. I think as you saw from the principals, unfortunately, is not a pure learning stance for me at this point. The reality is, yes, I am trying to learn as much as I can every day, and there's also at the same time, the daily opportunities and to be leading, right? So I think as many as you know right now, none of us have had the opportunity just to sit back and say, I'm just going to sit back and observe. We are sitting back observing while also leading, which I think is important for us, who are new in our roles, to try to be able to do that, both things simultaneously. If we are just leading without trying to develop a better understanding of the organization, I feel like that will impact us sort of in that strategic planning for moving forward. So this phase, 2 major pieces of what I'm trying to do. One, I've been meeting consistently with central office staff. Hopefully they're not too sick of me yet to be in our meetings, to calibrate on what are our structures, systems, practices, and progress across all areas of district. HR, METCO, teaching and learning, student supports, all different areas of our district, while I continue to have one-to-one and group meetings to learn the strengths, challenges, and opportunities. I wish I had a number for you on how many people I've met with. I think you probably all know we've had a lot of meetings so far with groups and with people, and this has helped me to start to develop sort of an understanding of where we are as a community. So I'd like to jump in on just some of the initial learning from phase 2. I am going to stay very high level today, and that's intentional. Because what I've done so far, I have not been able to meet with educators, consistently as a group or individually. I have not been able to meet with families sort of collectively in larger sort of settings and forums. There's still some stakeholder groups. Students are most important stakeholders I haven't had the chance to meet with. So there's still important pieces of data that are missing as I try to piece together a story. With that said, there's some trends that have come through pretty clear that I wanted to take the time to share tonight, again, in high level strokes. First, I don't know how many times sort of we can share this, but I think we need to say it more often, right? We have a really, really awesome staff of educators in our community. I hear words like talented, dynamic, hardworking, collaborative, right? And I heard about that all summer, and it's been great to see that in practice as we've been in schools and felt the buzz of the school year starting. I feel very confident and excited about the staff that we have across the district. And I heard that strength from teachers. I hear that strength from parents. I hear that strength from students. I hear that strength from our team. I observed that strength. So I think this is a trend I feel pretty confident is going to hold as I continue to move forward in the process. Second, families and community. This is a community that takes great pride in education. I heard that a lot in the interview process. I heard that a lot sort of in my first few months. Susan and I were talking about it today, just so you feel this special pride in this community no matter where you are. People talked about the fair, talked about the football game, in the hallways. There is a special pride in this community, and I think a lot of it stems from just how families and how the community view education and the importance of education. And I also think there's an opportunity here to really leverage families and communities even more to build stronger partnerships for our children, which I'll get to. Extracurricular activities. I think, Mr. Robinson, I remember from our entry interview where he shared, this is something that is we have a reputation in Reading of just the high quality of extracurricular activities across the area. And even talking to some students already, they say, this is why I love to come to school every day, right? So our extracurriculars in so many different ways are top notch. And the last one, the direction that's not directed, it could be director, right? But it's direction of special education. I have heard a lot of comments and ideas around just the trajectory people feel we're on with the work we're doing in special education, right? That people feel that our work with families and with students is building trust, building relationships, and has already started to pave the path for us to really be what a few people have said is a model district for others and how we're approaching special education. So obviously I see Dr. Stiles here. Credit to Dr. Stiles and the entire team for prioritizing the needs of all of our students, and people seem to be very excited about where we're going, and also know areas where we need to continue to improve. Some of the areas that have stuck out as areas of growth and challenge, we've talked many times around the idea of culture and morale, and I think this is important for a couple of reasons. I think this is important because, as we all know, when you are in an organization with a positive culture and morale, people are going to want to be a part of it. Students, staff, families, and that's what we want. I also feel strongly that culture and morale lead to outcomes, right? This is the type of culture that we need to build, a culture of excellence, a culture of belonging, right? So we have some work to do to build up our culture and morale, and especially I think that starts with building trustful relationships at all levels of the organization. Us as a central office team, building trustful relationships with one another, building trustful relationships between the school committee and the administration, building trustful relationships with our staff, building trustful relationships between staff and families. We recognize that there's some work to do in this area. And again, I'm not getting too deep into this yet because this is just initial sort of things I'm learning. Second piece is around high school programming. I've heard a lot from high school families over the past few months around the question of, is there more we could do for our high school students to be successful at RMHS, or especially in the area of programming? Some examples of this that have popped up are around possible ideas for dual enrollment, possible vocational opportunities, possible pathways. So if you're familiar with pathways around, computer science or engineering, a particular area of interest that might be there for particular students, expanded AP offerings. Goes back to Dr. Burnham's quote about feeling that sense of belonging in a school, right? So how do we make sure that students feel that there's programming in place where they can be connected, but also how do we have the programming that connects to students' interests, skill sets, passions, things like that. So we're aware that there's some work that we have to do around building sort of more comprehensive programming at the high school level. Full day kindergarten, right, for ensuring that all of our youngest learners have access to full day kindergarten, which we know is so essential for their growth, not only as humans, but as for their success in their future years in education. District-wide systems and processes. We've learned a lot that there is, while there's a lot of people working really, really hard across the district, we don't always or consistently have the systems in place to allow us to work as smart as we want or as efficiently as we want. So we are taking a close look at what are some of those systems that we need to implement to sort of ensure higher levels of efficiency, which we'll get to in a few minutes when we talk about our district priorities. And then last but not least, equity in all learners. A few people have come out to share with me that they feel that we need to have a shared commitment as a district to what do you mean when you talk about equity? What do you mean when you say you're going to support the needs of all learners? Okay. And also more than that, what does that look like in practice when you have students in front of you at the classroom level? What does that look like, right, when we're engaging with families? What does that look like, right, when how we're talking about sort of diversity in our community? I think there's a lot of work from what I've heard to get the community rowing in the right direction, in the same direction, around truly meeting the needs of all learners. So over the next couple of months, I will be doing a few things to continue to learn more, and that's through the fall entry activities. I will continue one-to-one and group meetings. Hopefully you've learned by now, I will not turn down an invitation for a meeting. So if you are an organization or a group in the community and you'd like to meet, I would love to meet with you. I'd like to meet with anyone individually who'd love to find the time to chat and connect. So please keep reaching out. I would love to continue to learn through that format. Second bullet, assessment of district systems, structures, and practices. We are going to continue to learn about what systems, structures, and practices are in place and where the gap is between where we want to go. On a daily basis, as we meet with our central office team, we will learn a new system that we could be doing sort of better, as we hear from principals, as we hear from teachers, as we hear from families. For example, one thing we realize is that we have some work to do with our district website. Like right now, we feel that the way that our website is organized doesn't allow families or staff to quickly access things that they would need. nor does it celebrate or highlight a lot of the good things that we have in place. That's just one example of one, sort of structure that we have as our website that we realize need work. But there's a lot more that we're learning sort of as we go through. So our team is going to continue to have a lens of systems level thinking. What are these systems we need in place? Now I'll get to the one I'm most excited about, full day school visits. I shared a little bit about this before. I will be spending a full day in each school community, each of our 9 schools for a full day with the hopes of truly learning about just what is that school like in terms of instruction, in terms of operations, in terms of culture. And we feel the best way to be doing this is sort of through a full day visit. A couple details about that. As Dr. Hardy shared in her entry process, she is also conducting school visits for the full day, so we'll be doing those together. Also, Dr. Stiles, who is, knows the communities already, is committing to, joining us. We're not going to take the full day off her plate, just given that she already has some context. But with the goal of us being able to calibrate on what we're seeing, all 3 of us will be in that building for the same day. So you'll be learning more about each of those coming up. Those days will start with a caregiver coffee. So anyone in the community who would like to come, just as an informal meet and greet, before we jump into classrooms, before we jump into lunch, recess, common planning time, to have an open meeting with families just to engage and interact within the school context. So we're very excited about leading those. Last time there was a question around how are those visits structured? We asked principals to structure those in a way that we could best learn about your school. So however they want to structure those, we expect there's obviously some, observations of teaching and learning. Outside of that, whatever they think they can set up for us to learn is what we will do. We'll also then report out to the school community what we learn sort of about that individual school as we go through. And then last, I will host forums for staff. My forums for the staff will be hosted, after my visits to each school. So for example, if I have a full day visit at Killam, followed by that full day visit, I'll then have the forum for the Killam staff right after. So it'll be a Killam full day. We'll also have forums for staff by unit. So that means by, group of secretaries, custodial staff, nursing staff, sort of by unit as well. And then we'll also have opportunities for forums with families, so by school building and also some other organizations in those specific schools. By students, by level, so having virtual forums for elementary students, middle school students, and high school students, our most important stakeholder group. I want to hear it directly from them. I've already heard from a lot of students just walking through the hallways. They're very eager to tell me what's on their minds. But that's another sort of way for me to learn more formally, and then to open it up to the community to have forums as well. So you'll be getting more details about that as we're moving forward. I want to also share, in addition to those, please know that we are as visible that's very important to us, and we feel that the way we're going to learn is by being visible and present. So when we're doing full day school visits, that is certainly not the only time when we're in schools, as you probably have learned. But it is our goal through this, and my goal, to learn as much as I can about the community. So that way, when I give you another report in November, and then finally come out in January to say, here's all the things that I've learned, that we feel that this reflects sort of the views, the ideas, the perspectives of our entire Reading community. So I'll pause there to see if anyone has any questions or thoughts.
Looking down the table, I see smiles behind their masks, but I don't see questions. So I guess I'll ask one question. You and I, we talked a little bit about it this morning as well, the system structures, practices, and they just keep coming, right? How are you planning to catalog and prioritize them, right? You can't tackle them all at once. So what's your process of capturing what needs to be improved, what the improvement is, and then prioritizing, X improvement versus Y improvement from a focus perspective?
That is a great question. I think it's actually a good segue. I don't want to transition us away from this, but it's exactly what we're going to talk about in some of our priorities for the upcoming year. So if I can pause on that and just move forward.
Okay, so seeing no questions, please move forward.
Thank you for giving me a very smooth segue there too. So we're going to move into talking a little bit about our district improvement plan review and update discussion to give you a little bit of an idea as Mr. Wise just shared of what are some of the things that we're focusing on this year, how are we prioritizing things. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Stiles, who's going to walk us through our plan for this year.
I wasn't expecting a remote. So
Little
thank
things.
you. So just to give a little bit of context, this committee, the community has seen the district improvement plan that was written by Dr. Doherty and his team, and it's very robust and comprehensive, and there is a lot in that. And one of the things that we really wanted to do is take all of the values and beliefs that were put into that document and figure out how to put it into practice, as Dr. Milichewski just said. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we really make some thoughtful decisions about implementing this plan, but also make sure we are collaborative and connected and everyone has a voice in figuring out what makes sense. So the first thing that we did to really develop this shared understanding was we met with the principals, the vice principals, the coordinators, the directors, and the central office staff. And we spent several days together. And part of that learning was to really go through the plan as it exists and try to come up with almost a cover page, something that could say, here's where we're going to focus for this year, and here's how we can talk about how we're moving forward in a very specific way that we then have a shared understanding about and can move forward in actionable steps. And we wanted everybody to be able to talk about it and own it. And so we spent a lot of time digging in, coming together, talking about the language, and figuring out really what our values are and how are we going to put them in practice. And then we spent 2 days with the school committee, all of the building leaders, central office staff, and school committee, and we went through it again in a way to make sure, again, that everybody had a voice, that we were collaborative and thoughtful, while building those trustful relationships that you heard all of our building leaders talk about, and really trying to have a sense of belonging of all members of the community so that we had ownership in this plan. And then after we went through and made changes and updated and incorporated everybody's thoughts and understandings, Dr. Milichewski shared it out with all of the staff on our opening day. And to go back to one of the things Dr. Hardy was saying at the beginning, is we wanted it to be joyful, and we wanted it to really express who we are as Reading Public Schools and be able to encapsulate that in a way that people understood that we believe in the excellent staff, community, and students, and how do we live that out on a daily basis. So what we did is, you will see here at the top, the vision is instilling the joy of learning and inspiring the innovative leaders of tomorrow. That was the vision that was there, and we really felt like, right, that's our vision. But how do we live it out when we have this multi-page document? So what's our goal? And what all of those people and all we kept talking about was all RPS students are going to demonstrate academic, social, emotional, and personal success. And we spent a lot of time talking about all means all. All students are going to demonstrate success. And what do we need to do as a community of leaders and learners ourselves to ensure that students are going to have those opportunities? So we really boiled the improvement plan into 2 specific focus areas. And one is really around having safe and rigorous learning environments for students. And when you break that down, it's really about developing and communicating operational systems, safety, infrastructure, all of these processes that we've been talking about. How do we do that in a way this year that makes sense, is prioritized, meets the needs of the staff so they can meet the needs of all of the students? The other strategy under that was really developing this mindset around how are we supporting all students? How are we expressing our absolute belief that everyone is going to succeed in Reading Public Schools. And so we need to look at our social emotional learning, which connects back to some of the work that Dr. Burnham was talking about, and equity. And you heard a little bit about our trip to Boston and making sure that our students who live in Boston are part of our Reading school community in every conversation. And then academics, a big part of our district improvement plan was the work of ensuring that all students can learn to read and all students have rigorous opportunities to do that. That's captured in here because we're talking about all academics. So we really had that student focus first, but in order to live out and really ensure that our students have what they need, we need to make sure that our staff have what we need and they need in order to be successful. And we heard that from every person who spoke tonight, how amazing our staff is. And so our focus area is our talented and committed staff. So what we really want to do is develop a value proposition of who we are as a community and what we value, so that everyone can really talk about all learners, equity, and excellence. And we've seen that already pay off. As Michelle Roach has redefined some of our job descriptions, we went from 3 applicants to 60 applicants just by saying, this is who we are and this is why you'd love to come and work here. This is really highlighting all of the great things we've heard about Reading tonight. And not to be the 4th strategy because it's less, because they're all equal and some are going to happen simultaneously, but really, again, back to those systems and practices, especially around our staff. So how are we retaining the amazing staff we have? How are we developing their skills and making sure that they know everything they need to know to make sure all of our students have what they need? And then how do we bring in the right people to drive our work even more forward? And so this really was a very collaborative effort of everyone coming together, having a voice, and really coming to terms with, this is where we're focusing on, and this is how we're going to move forward. And all of the people who really looked at this are able to articulate, what are we doing and how are we doing it? And since then, we've started to dive into these action steps and are starting to we met with all the building leaders and directors and coordinators to say, okay, what are all the steps now? Now, let's list them all out, let's prioritize them, figure out what's going to get us to these places, and how do we monitor it, check in, and report out that we maintain on track. So that's some of the work we've done, and we're really trying to balance it with the joy of learning and the connectedness, as Dr. Burnham talked about, so that we are coming together as a staff and feeling successful, and we're doing that in service of all our students and families.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Stiles. And to build on the action steps, part 2, and I think this connects to Mr. Wise's question, is we don't sit sort of in a room and then decide which are our priorities of the systems that we need to have. So we, again, with our DLT last time, a couple of weeks ago, was principals, directors, coordinators, to sat down and say, okay, you've all said that developing and communicating common operational systems is critically important for our district. Now, help us map out which ones are those that are on top of mind. Now, we had a list sort of last week, and I would say since school has opened, we found a few more that are probably moving to the top of the list. What our challenge is also remembering this is a 1-year plan, right? So what are the ones that we feel that, yeah, we should have some that are maybe quick to implement, easy wins, but there's also some that are going to take a full year for us to take on. So right now as a team, we're continuing to just refine what those actual action steps are. In the next school committee meeting, we will have the full list of action steps so you can see what does it look like for us to actually live all of these out. Now, I think something that was really, really important on this is you see in the middle, the goal is all RPS students. And I think that's something that I learned about in the community quickly was that we didn't quite, I hadn't, seen, or, with a new team especially, come across like a shared definition of what we mean when we talk about all students, or what we mean when we say we're committed to equity, and what that looks like. And I felt that that was important for us to do as a team of leaders across the district, which I'll define in a minute, and to come together to say, what do we mean when we talk about equity? Right? What do we mean when we talk about all RPS? Because if that's front and center, right, we need to know what we mean when we're talking about that. So to help us do that, what we did is on our last day of our leadership retreat, which included our school committee, our central office team, our directors, our coordinators, and our principals, we mapped out together what we thought was a shared definition of equity, and I think kind of morphed into also a shared commitment to equity and what that looks like. So you'll see that written or typed up on the screen. I'm going to read it just in case people at home can't see it. And this is an RPS equity statement. And I also want to add, too, on the last day of the retreat, we also had members of our RTA executive board join us as well, too, so you'll see their voice and perspective reflected here as well. The Reading School Committee, Central Office, directors, principals, and leadership of the Teachers Association celebrate the diversity of the Reading community and beyond by embracing differences to empower every student, staff member, and family of the Reading Public Schools. We embrace all members of the community, no matter where we live, what we look like, what we believe, what language we speak, consistent with the human dignity of all. When we are unwavering in our commitment to equity, we support every student and staff member in maximizing individual potential. This requires us to identify, analyze, and confront gaps and opportunities and outcomes for all students. I first want to thank everyone who was a part of developing this definition. If you've ever been in a room with about 30 people and tried to reach consensus on anything, it is very, very difficult. If you also trying to do, any leading equity work, as we know, is really difficult and challenging. So trying to come to sort of this shared place was challenging. And I would also say I was very proud and impressed just by how the team of RPS leaders came together to make what I think is a really powerful statement about what RPS leaders across the district believe and are committed to doing. I want to call out that last line that says, this requires us to identify, analyze, and confront gaps and opportunities and outcomes for all students. That's really hard work. Over the next, few weeks as we start to share our action steps, hopefully you'll see what we mean. We say how we're going to start to identify gaps, what we're going to do to analyze gaps, and how we're going to confront them. But what we've shown in here is that our students need us to be unwavering in that commitment. So we are excited to kick off sort of our work of supporting all learners across RPS, and we think that there was no stronger way to do that than to have a shared commitment from our school committee, from our RTA, from our principals, from our central office staff, from our directors, and from our coordinators. So again, we'll see how this lived out with our action steps, but we're really excited to kick it off in this way. So I'll pause there, and if there's any thoughts or questions on either just our priorities, the action steps to come, or our, where we stand with our RPS equity statement.
So looking at the committee, any thoughts, questions? We all had our chance at the thoughts and questions. I'll say one that struck me a little bit, and I was thinking about it and saying, did we include it in the what we portion of that? I think we covered a lot of like where we live, what we look like, what we speak. But the other part of that equity statement that I think we need to figure out how to add in somewhere, and I don't know what the right language is, but what the ability or special education background or need is, or the excellence that somebody has. So somehow we're still helping to promote them to move forward as well. I think that's somehow missed in there, and that's hindsight 2020. I wish I had brought that up when we were there in the offsite, but I think if somehow we can add that, then I think it's complete. But it's missing that one nugget in my mind.
Thank you. And I'll share as a follow-up. I told you it was a difficult task to get sort of consensus around in a room of different perspectives. Mr. Wise gave me the even more challenging task of following up with the group of 30 different perspectives to get consensus again. But I think that's a spot that I wish we had sort of thought about as a group or put in there. So what I'll do just as a follow-up is just float that by the group to see if we can fit that in. But I think that does cover the conversation of the room and some of the things and trends that we've seen. So I would love to find a way to fit that in there. So thank you for raising that.
Mr. Robinson?
So, I don't think it comes right out and says it, but I think the whole body of that, it captures it. I mean, when we talk about confront gaps and for, to have something for all, to embrace all, that includes special ed.
And I thought about that too. Maybe it's a little sensitivity that I have. I don't know if it's the right sensitivity or not, but I feel like that's a particular section that often feels underserved in that all definition. And that's part of the reason.
Depends on who you talk to.
Yep, it is. But I mean, and we've hit on a lot of the other sensitivities that are in that space. You're never going to hit them all, right? Ironically, in the definition of all. You don't want to have, a 20-page document of what all definition is, but I think as people look at it, do they see themselves there? I think a lot of people can say, yeah, where I live, yeah, I can see that. What I look like, yeah, I see that. What where I speak, yeah, I see that. What I believe, sure. Consistent with human dignity, absolutely. But there is that 17 or 18% of our population that doesn't, they are each one of those, but they're also something else, for lack of a better way to say it.
So I wonder, as you said that, what I wrote down is, and how we learn.
That's great.
And so maybe that's the piece. As adults and as students, it's how we learn also needs to be respected. So that may be a way to pull it in.
That's phenomenal, Jen. I love that already. So I think that addresses exactly what I was looking at. And I didn't know the right words, right? So, and that's just so everybody else watching at home, because nobody's here watching, that's how the conversation went at the offsite too. We would bounce things off and somebody would say, oh, what about how this terminology? And that is how the whole thing came together. So if everybody else is comfortable with that, I love that addition, and we'll see if everybody else would be comfortable with that addition.
I was going to make the same suggestion.
Awesome.
Great minds.
Great minds think alike. John, did you want to add something?
No, just a thumbs up. Yep.
Okay. All right. Great. So how we learn. If we can get everybody else on the same page, we'll have a slightly augmented one.
Good.
Anything else?
No, and again, we'll share out next, at our next school committee meeting, the action steps that we have, and you'll also see then alignment between the action steps and my own goals for leadership as superintendent. So I look forward to that, continuing the conversation at our next school committee meeting.
Can we get a copy of this presentation too? I didn't.
Absolutely.
I was going to ask for that, and I'll ask for it as well, to be added to the packet and have the packet updated on the website, because it was part of the content of the meeting, and it's very important that those two slides, they're all important, but those two slides speak to a lot of the key points that we want to make sure are out there.
Can we have all the presentations put in?
Sure, I would agree, yeah, put the teacher one as well.
We're on it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we will now transition to our last open session topic, which is the Arpa fund discussion. So just as an introduction, I put the memo in the packet, but the memo is really kind of from the three of us to a degree, between Dr. Milczewski, Sean, and myself. And we all, as a committee, were able to join the Finance Committee Financial Forum meeting on the 31st of August. One of the things I think is important is that we prepare ourselves to advocate for how we would want a portion of that funding to be used. And think about it from a prioritization perspective, think about it from a advocacy perspective, from an action step perspective. What do we need to do to get ourselves ready for that? What do we need to do as a committee, whether that's something public from a forum perspective, whether that's research, whatever the case may be, what we may need help from the administration team to do in terms of pulling different data points together or anything else along those lines, creating a survey, whatever the case may be. The goal being, I don't think it'll be final in any way, shape, or form. I think there's too little time between now and, October 20th necessarily, but the goal being that we have a bit more of a firm stance as a committee of where we would advocate for some of the money to be used. And this is kind of a collaborative session. I'm going to relax the Robert's rules, raise hands, all that stuff during this portion of the conversation. I will take notes as we go through in terms of ideas that people have, and that's a collective, right, of how it can be used, but also I think it's incredibly important that we leave here with action steps. What are we going to do about that to prepare ourselves to understand if that's something we really want to advocate for? How are we going to gather additional information? Who are we going to talk to? And who's doing it? So that's kind of the introduction. And Sean, I know you've done some research in particular on some of the language, so I'll give you a chance to give some of that feedback as well, and then we can jump in from there. And Dr. Milczewski, if you want to add in as well.
Yeah, so I would say about the language for the ARPA funding is generally oriented around things that you could define as infrastructure or things that you could define as addressing some of the impacts of COVID-19. And, you could reasonably read both of those things as fairly broad, potentially. So for instance, there's language in the ARPA rule, which was issued back in, May or June, and I can share it with everyone. There's language in the ARPA rule, which is around COVID has had disproportionate impacts on, low-income families, low education, folks with low educational attainment and people of color. And so there are lots of things, lots of programs, lots of investments that you can imagine us being interested in making that could fit into addressing sort of the disproportionate impacts of some of those disproportionate impacts. Infrastructure, right? Certainly investments that we could make that would, kind of squarely check the box from an infrastructure perspective. So my take and my suggestion, I think to Tom when we talked about this before was, let's not sort of start by putting a box around what we think are sort of the most important things to talk about, and let's, we'll apply that as a filter at some point to say, what's the case you make that makes this relevant from an ARPA perspective or appropriate from an ARPA perspective? But most of the things that we've sort of, thrown out on the table so far, you could probably make a credible argument that it fits into one or both of those definitions.
So just to add to there, as you've seen in your packet, Holliston has taken a process that they've gone through already. They were one of the 31 towns, districts in the state that did not yet have a plan for full-day kindergarten. That was one idea that was floated as a potential. And you can see in the packet some of the information they gathered, how they gathered it, and what they used as some of their justification, and then how they planned to use that from a spend down perspective over a multi-year period. That's one potential example, not the only example, of course, but I wanted to use that from a, first of all, not all the best ideas have to come from this room. Some of them can come from other places, and we can certainly learn from other people, but also because I know that I think we all know that's been a topic of this community's interest for quite some time, and so is this a chance that we can take in that space? So that was just one example. The other examples we've talked about so far, but please, I want to kind of have the brainstorming start, would be, some of the vocational opportunities at the high school, tutoring or additional reading curriculums in the lower grades to curriculum tools to help in those spaces that have impacted the early understandings that are necessary, foundational understandings that are necessary in that space, but I'm sure there are plenty others. So with that said, Tom, is there anything you want to add as well from your perspective, and where do we want to go from here?
That's great. The only thing I'll add to just the brainstorm right away is I think I've had individual conversations with many people in the community and on the committee of just our need to build out our nursing staff and our nursing department that better reflects the context that we're in. I feel that right now our nursing department goes above and beyond to support the needs of our students. And the work and the demand and the burden on Mary Juliana's Department of Nursing, we just think is tremendous right now. So I think whether it's in this conversation, I think would be nice. I think a lot of the ARPA funds, the intent of ARPA aligns with more fully fleshing out our nursing staff, but also that's something we're exploring within our own team of how do we do that. I have had conversation with Mary, and she has expressed that the best thing we could be able to do is for this 1 year to be able to provide a float nurse, and that would be able to support us to just close gaps in coverage, to be able to provide, even something as simple as lunch breaks for nurses from time to time, help us out with testing, whether that's test and stay or whether that's, eventually pool testing, different things like that we feel is really an essential need. So again, I think it is relevant for this conversation, so I wanted to float it out there. And I also wanted the committee to know that's something that we are exploring sort of on our own as well, just given that we feel this is a critical need for us in the context that we're in.
Tom, can I ask?
Absolutely.
I guess.
Go right ahead.
Of you or Sean, so with the Holliston, so in theory, they put together their argument, but it hasn't been tested yet, right? Because or have they already submitted it? Because I see we have to submit by, what, October 31st?
They've put together their argument and they've gotten their approval.
They
from
did
a
get
Holliston
their, okay,
perspective.
that's what I.
There's not necessarily, and maybe Susan, you know for sure, but as far as I understand, there's not somebody who's going to say, yes, we agree, or we disagree with your argument. Eventually, there will be an audit that comes back and says, does that make logical sense?
That's what I
but-
meant, I mean, the audit type so that hasn't happened yet, or?
No.
Okay.
Those happen usually post-fact as opposed to
Right.
pre-fact.
But haven't there been other communities that have structured the transition to free full-day kindergarten in a similar way where, was it
But not
Annenberg?
using these particular funds.
No, but the idea of breaking down the payment and the dependence upon the tuition little by little over the course of, 4 or 5 years.
Yes,
So-
Andover is exactly
The model.
the most recent use
Yeah,
case
they've-
outside of Holliston that did that, and they did it with existing operating funds, as opposed to the ARPA funds. So one of the questions we've had from a Reading perspective, and we may have new, fresh eyes looking at that, we do have new, fresh eyes looking at that, right, is how could we do that? Could we do that, right? We started kind of brief discussions about that, but we haven't made any progress on it. So is this a chance where we can say, outside of operating funds, if we had, say, 2 million over 5 years, could we use that as a
Wean ourselves.
wean
essentially.
ourselves off the full day cost? And then if we do that, is there some benefit that we would see at the 5-year period that essentially pays for itself or not, right? So one of the things I found interesting about the Holliston stuff is, and I think this is going to the next step, so, paying attention over there. I found interesting is the correlation they were able to draw between their half-day kindergarten students and the support they needed in grades 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? And if we have enough data available to us that shows how many of our students that were half-day that ended up on an IEP that maybe wouldn't have if they'd been full-day and had more time with a teacher? How many of our students need other additional wraparound services because they're, maybe not because of, but as a correlation. Correlation isn't necessarily causation, right? But there's a correlation there that shows that there's a relationship that they need more wraparound services than they would otherwise. If there's a way for us to gather that data and build that argument for Reading, that's one of the things I think is one of the key action steps we'd have to come out and see how we can pull that together for Reading.
So what you're saying in theory is, I don't even know what the number is right now, it's $2 million to do this?
1.25 per year is the current rough number,
So in
right?
theory, at the end of the day, we have to be able to find, once we're done with this, there's got to be somewhere else in the budget that comes out, and that may be those extra services that we're providing now that we might not have to provide down the road.
The question, yeah, it's a question that goes back to some of our previous conversations. Is there an investment to save? And in this case, we're using potentially ARPA fund monies to invest.
Right.
To eventually get some savings down the road, right? And it also ties to the podcast conversation that we listened to going into the offsite, right? Where you listen to the podcast, in that particular case, in Missouri, that district, that particular school had a 25% special education referral rate and kids on IEPs. And when they finished the work, which wasn't just kindergarten, it was mostly reading materials, right? But when they finished the work, they were down to 12.5%. And that's a pretty big drop, right, in terms of number of kids that were necessary or identified from an IEP perspective, from a learning perspective, all because of the investment they made in their reading, curriculum, teaching, and instruction processes, right? So I'm kind of crossing streams here, but that's an example of how the investment made can reduce other costs and bring savings in other places.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in thinking about something like full-day K, there's really sort of two pieces that we have to prove probably to ourselves for us to move forward with something like this. One is, can we prove that there's a case that it sort of fits into the scope of this COVID funding, right? I actually think that's a relatively easy thing to do, because when you think about the way that we structure it, we have supports for low-income families, but wherever you draw that line, there are families that are having to make a really hard decision about whether they can afford full-day K or whether they have to, not have a family vacation that summer or defer maintenance on the house or whatever else it might be, right? So that ties into me to the economic impact, the job loss, all those sorts of things that come out of COVID. And I think you can make that case. And then the second piece of it, which is what Tom is really alluding to, is can you convince yourself, or can you build a glide path so that you, by the end of the 3, 4, 5 year, whatever phase in that you're doing with the COVID funding, you're able to self-sustain that cost that today we're, drawing a million plus in revenue for. So, I think my gut is that on the full-day K example, both of those boxes can be checked, but there's certainly some work to do. And I agree with Tom as well. I think it's probably not just about full-day K, it's also about what else do you want to look at from an early education, from a reading instructional support perspective that proves out, over 3, 4, 5 years, reductions in other supports and potentially create some cost savings down the line.
I mean, I'm sorry.
Just give Sarah a chance, and we'll come back to you.
I was just going to say, if you're looking at it from a disproportionate impact lens, our early learners, given the past year and a half, 2 years of hybrid and remote learning, they probably have taken the biggest hit in a lot of ways. So if we can provide a path for full-day K, if we can take a look at, reading curriculum tools, whether the most appropriate we should be using and meeting their needs. I think those are two of the biggest buckets in my mind. And then I think, Tom Milishevsky, to your point, if we're talking about disproportionate impact, our nursing staff, we're seriously asking so much of them, and we do not want to burn them out. So if there is a way, whether through funding, through hazard pay, et cetera, I think we should also really talk about that as well.
Okay, Chuck, you were going to say, and then
Well,
Carla.
I was just going to say, to what Sean was saying, everything that we decide on, I think the key consideration would have to be sustainability, because we don't want to give something for 3 years and take it away. We want it to live on.
Agree. It's a key point, right? So the spend path-wise, we have to think about, we have the ability to spend the money over 5 years, right? Counting this year. So this year's gone, so 4 years, right? We have it has to be spent by October 31st, 2026, I think is what
December 31st.
December 31st, 2026. We have to allocate it and make the decision as a town, not as a school committee, because it's not just our decision, as a town by 2024, right? So we have the 22, 23, the 23, 24, 24, 25, and half of 26 school years to think about from that perspective, and then it comes back away for the second half of the 26, 27 school year. Carla, you were going to say something.
So I feel like we're mixing a bunch of things together here. If we are going to go the full-day kindergarten route, do we not offer half-day at that point? Once we as a district decide to go full-day, we're in full-day, right?
Correct, that would be the plan.
Okay, so this is obviously a direction we have to go in as a district. I don't think we need any justification for it, so to speak. I do worry about like where the money's going to come from, and maybe it's our job to say, this is something we're interested in, and welcome, Susan, but look at this huge task you have in front of you. Right? I mean, right? I mean, what are those creative ways to say, okay, this is what we're going to be saving on this end of it over those years, because now you're going to be, gleaning out all this money that we're supposed to find in our budget somewhere. In addition to this kindergarten piece of it, and the nursing help, which I think is just a definite, and it's a temporary type of situation, and it fits perfectly into the requirements of the grant. For me, this is an opportunity for, obviously, the high school, for vocational and different options and electives at the high school. I think that's a huge, huge piece of it. And then, now we're going to take all the students in between full-day kindergarten and the high school and say, okay, what kind of supports are needed through tutoring services just to get kids back to where they need to be? Because we know different students were affected differently and their learning abilities were affected differently for numerous reasons. And how do we get those students the support as well?
Okay, so just to structure ourselves a little bit now that we've kind of kicked off, I want to first just see if there's any additional brainstorming of other things we'd want to do. Once we do that, I want to then start going through each individual idea and build out what the action steps, what information we want to gather, or anything else along those lines. And potentially, if we know who's going to do it, by when they, we're not going to have a complete by when, but ideally when we'd like to target it for, I'll call it a target date, not an absolute due date, because there's a lot of other things people are working on, right? But at least it gives some sort of prioritization to a degree. And then we can go from there. And please jump in over here with some of the other ideas as well. This is not just an us conversation, this is all of us conversation. So let's start with that. Are there any other ideas that people have for how we might want to advocate for ARPA funding? And the ideas I have written down so far are full-day kindergarten, nursing staff additions, vocational education at the high school, elementary tutors, elementary literacy curriculum tools, different options for electives at the high school, and then I'm going to put supporting the kids in the middle, for lack of a better way to say it, based on what Carla just said. And then we can figure out what that means at a later point in time. And Aaron, go ahead.
So I'm not adding something new.
Okay.
I just want to comment.
Sure.
So part of what I'm struggling with a little bit is some of this I just don't feel like we have like enough information to justify some of these, and so it's hard because here we have this amazing opportunity, and I agree with you, like we want to get all our ducks in a row so that we can go into that financial forum and be crystal clear and be a united front on what we're advocating for our schools. But some of these, while I support exploring the idea, I'm not sure that we're going to have enough information to justify saying this is what we need to spend money on. For me personally, supporting Mary and our nursing staff is like an immediate need that needs to happen like yesterday. So that to me is just a no-brainer, absolute. Full-day kindergarten, no-brainer, like absolute. We've been talking for years and years about how to make that happen in this community. We've been saying for years, full-day kindergarten is the best educational and social model for our students. Here we have an opportunity potentially to finally make that happen. And I think we would be foolish to not capitalize on it. So that is huge for me. But I also agree with Carla about the high school. I think it's a bigger conversation about, expanding pathways and offerings and graduation requirements. But I think even if there's some more programmatic stuff that we can bring in, not just vocational, but allowing our students to specialize in other ways, just sort of expanding what we are offering, so that we're not pigeonholing students on particular paths that don't align with their passion and interest. I'm all for, creating well-rounded students and future citizens of the world, but I think that there's a lot more that we could be doing for that population. So if there's a way to use some of this to get us started in that process, then I think that would definitely be a priority for me.
Okay, so first to address the first point, I agree that there's no way we're going to get to the point of knowing everything we need to know before October 20th, right? It's just not possible. I think, given everything from an opening of school, giving all the potential ideas here, given the fact that there's, 1 month and 7 days away, it's not going to happen. What the intent here, though, is to figure out how we structure ourselves and what pieces of information we need to gather to be better informed. If I'm reading the way the last meeting went, I think what we'll leave the next meeting with, I'm hoping, is a greater super committee of the committees of Reading that will then take that away as an action. But we can continue to push behind the scenes those items that we're building out, right? And we can continue to have this conversation. Frankly, it might just be an agenda item at a standing point to a degree, updates from our perspective of what is our number one priority, what's our number two priority. If you're given X amount of money, which one are you going to spend first? And how would you spend it, right? So I think that's really more the goal than it is to say, we're going to go in there and we're going to know everything we need to know. But it is really more to get ourselves going in that direction. What data do we need to gather? Who needs to do it? And how do we support the cause of the justification as necessary? I will caution this group, though. I think we're all generally on the same page that we want to do full-day kindergarten. But I don't think we should be in, here comes Ed, good. I don't think necessarily we should think it's a slam dunk because of the financial impacts of it. I think we definitely have to make the argument that it can sustain itself in some way, shape, or form within the budget. The reality of the fact of the matter is we are a town with 93% residential income and 7% or 92 and 8, whatever the case is, commercial, and that does play into what we can afford as a town. And so we have to be careful, right? We're not just going to add it and just start bleeding money and then going for the next override because that's the right thing to do. We have to be careful about what we are using the taxpayer money for. I agree it's the right thing. To a degree, I also think there's an augmentation between full-day kindergarten and curriculum tools. They support each other appropriately because it's only as good as what we're able to instruct them on to a degree. So there's kind of a joint meeting there. So going back to what I was going to say before, are there any other ideas that people want to put on the table? And can I get also an agreement from Carla and Aaron about whether you're saying the same thing when you say different options for electives at high school versus pathways opportunity expansion at the high school? Are those the same thing, or is that two separate things? One being a pathway type program and one being just expanding the electives?
So I was thinking more, and maybe it falls, I guess elective is sort of broad, because we also have like business and technology, right? So, it's a commonly agreed upon point that our computer sciences is, I can't even call it a program because we offer one class. Which
Yep.
is, don't get me started. But, so, can we expand our computer sciences? Can we start to get into vocational / career path type coursework? I've said, like, why aren't we offering early childhood development? We have a preschool in our high school. I'm just spitballing. But, so I guess technically some of that would fall under electives. But I guess just more. What
yours is a little bit more specific.
Provide our students so that they can pursue passions and interests. So I don't know if that's exactly what Carla was saying.
So the vocational piece of it is almost like a dual enrollment, right? Because we're not going to be able to replicate with our spacing and with our offerings, right? We're not going to be able to replicate that. So can we have a dual enrollment, right? Which is one piece of it. The second piece of it is, to have pathways in electives, right? For a person who wants to go into the health field, maybe we have an allied health kind of track. Is there a engineering track? Is there a computer science track? Whatever those tracks are. So that is, in my eyes, a development of our elective offerings.
Okay,
Vocational school is kind of existing. We're not going to bring that. In my mind, we're not going to bring that in here, but maybe we have that kind of opportunity with.
So what I'm hearing is you're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to make sure I could collapse that appropriately as one idea as opposed to two.
Yeah.
And the vocational one, we'll keep that one as a separate one because it's a little bit more specific.
I would add to the dual enrollment, community college, state college, whatever the options are, but we'd love to see that as an option for some of our students. Right now, it's like, sure, go figure it out
Yep.
if you want to do that, but, I would love to have it more standardized for our students.
Okay, okay. So now we have the ideas on the table. So let's start building out. Actually, before I do that, any further ideas on this side that anybody wants to add? No?
Tom, if we done a temperature check in terms of where we are with PPE and all that stuff, because that's gonna take some of this money as well.
The word on the street is we have PPE for 2 years.
All right.
So I think we're okay from that perspective. That's what that room is for. So I think we're okay, unless somebody tells me otherwise, but the last I heard is don't buy PPE because you have PPE for 2 years.
Yeah, I don't anticipate us needing any major investments in PPE at this point. Is there maybe small things we might need here or there? Who knows? But I think we're very well stocked for our current context.
And technology?
I appreciate.
The one-to-one?
Yeah, I think we appreciate sort of all the work that, Dr. Doherty and Ms. Dowd did, and Dr. Stiles last spring in gearing things up. That put us in a really good place with technology and positioned us when sort of all the computers come in to position us to be able to execute one-to-one sort of across the district. But as you know, with the chip shortage, we're still waiting for some devices. But I think we're in a really good space in terms of infrastructure with technology. So I think some of these conversations that we're hearing now, I think are the ones that are probably more in aligned with what we see as some of the, the needs and the goals for us. I would share too, just to follow up on what I've heard so far too, is that Dr. Hardy and I actually had this conversation today, is that a couple of these give a more clear path forward than the others do, right? And then we are in support sort of everything that's been discussed here. The two that Aaron moved to the top of just, float nurse, we think we know how we'd implement that. Universal K, I think we know sort of what that would look like in practice. The high school example, which I am fully behind, I know Mr. Petracy's fully behind, we are still at the very initial phases of exploring even what that would look like. Similarly, when we're talking about like literacy materials, right? Looking at sort of us assessing sort of what are the needs, what are some of the ways that, we could then use certain materials to then close, some of the gaps and needs that we see. I think those are things that we need to explore, right? So I think the first two that, Aaron described are the clearest path forward for us. That doesn't mean that everything else we described isn't something that's on the front of our mind that we're looking at, that we're analyzing. I just think it's interesting how they're both, some are clearer packaged than others.
Yeah, and I think it's probably important that we remember that these funds don't have to be committed until the end of 2024, right?
Right.
And so there may be things that are no-brainers that we want to move, we want to push to move forward with now or appeal to move forward with now. But it doesn't mean that all the dollars have to be spent in the next 6 months. And so, if there are things like that we all sort of agree are important, but are going to require 6 months or a year of analysis to figure out what it would look like and what the programs would be and, how you'd need to fund them sustainably and all those sorts of things, I think there's room to do that. And that should probably be part of how we position it with whatever the super committee, I'm looking at Ed, whatever the super committee ends up looking like.
Yep.
That should be part of how we position it, is there are near-term needs that we feel really strongly about, and here's the case, and there are medium-term needs that we also feel really strongly about, but we
We're
know that
building
we
the
need some
case.
time to build the case.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
100%, yep.
And we should get a confirmation from Ed that we're getting 90% of the 7 million.
That was on your agenda tonight, right? Yeah.
You're outnumbered, Ed.
You should have brought backup if you were going to argue with us.
Okay, so I'm going to tackle the low-hanging fruit first. I was going to go to full-day kindergarten, but we can spend a lot of time on full-day kindergarten. So nursing staff additions. You and I talked about this a little bit this morning, and so I want to get kind of a pulse of the committee here to a degree as well. I think there's very much an argument to be made that ARPA funding could be used for this year at least, and maybe even longer, right? The question I have is, do we want to wait? And I think the answer to that, from my perspective, is no. So then, so what? What do we do about that? We can certainly make the argument that it's something that should be ARPA related or ESSER related if there's something still left in the ESSER grants. We may have hired, like the conversation we had this morning, we put in for certain hiring as part of the ESSER grants. Maybe they hired 2 weeks later or a month later than they were forecasted for, so there's 6 weeks of savings there, or there's another 2 months of savings coming from somebody who's yet to be hired. And so we could just say, you know what, go, get it done, hire that person, and we'll figure out how to make the argument on a go-forward basis, whether it's ESSER, whether it's ARPA, whether it's others. But it can tie to either one of those funding buckets, for lack of a better way to say it, and it's the right thing to do. So I want to get a pulse from the committee about whether you're comfortable with us telling the administration that from a budget perspective, or whether there's any reservations or concerns that we would want to address first.
So we're talking about an $80,000 to $100,000 budget amount roughly on top of?
Yeah, somewhere in that range.
Which we, in theory, wouldn't really have to know how we're going to pay for it until the end of the fiscal year, right? So
Potentially, and again, we might be able to, Susan's just on board, so she's still trying to figure out where all the money is and what buckets or things
no,
are
I mean,
in.
that's
But
the reality
Right.
of it. I mean, as long as at the end of the year, the budget, balances.
some way, somehow, at the end of the year, the budget balances, it's gone into the right buckets from a legal perspective and grant perspective and things like that. Yes, whether or not we can wait till the end of the year, whether we have to do it at 6 month increments or something like that, I think we can figure out. But my intent here is, I think there's, as there always is with hiring, some hiring delays happen that free up some concept of what you had reserved as a salary perspective, right? So let's pull some of that now to fill this gap now, and then we can figure out if we get to the 3 month or 6 month mark, what the next funding pool we'll use to finish out that.
Yeah, my feeling, that's where I was going. My feeling is go for it, and then we'll manage the budget and figure out and make it work.
John?
100% agree with the urgency, 100% agree that we could probably cover it, with our own staffing delays and things like that. The other thing that I'll just throw out there, and I know it feels like we're picking on Ed, but town meeting adjusted the FinCom reserves to be 300,000, I believe, last year, and that's still maintained this year. And the rationale for that was we don't know all the ways in which the pandemic is going to strain our budgets and create needs that we can't wait for an active town meeting to fund. And so this feels like the kind of thing we're identifying in real time that our nursing constraints are a problem for us in terms of being able to execute effectively and all the things we need to do from testing protocols and so forth. That's exactly the kind of thing, at least in my opinion, that I heard in that town meeting discussion that would be what you'd potentially go to FinCom for and say, can we find the extra 40 that we couldn't find in our own budget, out of FinCom reserves? So, of course, Ed can't speak for the committee, but I see him nodding his head approvingly over there, so.
I mean, I think,
You're just acknowledging that I'm speaking. I appreciate that. Thank you, Ed.
so I think that's what you're saying, that's one of the potential solutions. We don't have to determine
Yeah, I think there are
that tonight.
backstops is the point.
there's-
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yep. And I think one of the things we've done in the past is if we make an argument for that, but then we feel like we don't necessarily, at the end of the year, we didn't actually fully need it, then we return it back, which we did with the 300,000 for special education out of district just a couple of years ago, right? So it's possible that could be a backstop is probably a good way to think about it. That keeps us to make sure that we're confident that the person we hire in this floating role can stay throughout the year at least, and then we'll figure out what to do for the year after that. Any objections over there?
No objection at all. Just a clarifying question. Are we approaching this as a 1-year position, or are we approaching it as a indefinite position? And is that going to impact our ability to hire?
Great question. So I've met with both Mary and the entire nursing group of nurses. Resoundingly clear that the best way we could support them is by hiring a float nurse. and that's a one-year position. Mary and I had a conversation, there is a long-term, we need to take, look at the staffing in the program, sort of moving forward, and how we're staffed, and whether that means that we put a full float nurse in the budget moving forward, whether that means Mary becomes sort of the full-time sort of administrator overseeing the department. I don't yet know, those are longer conversations I'd want to have with Mary and, and sort of the nurses, but I do know it's been very, very clear that they're hopeful that just this 1 year, we can close this gap and then look sort of further out. And they've made it clear this is the best way we could support them.
Okay.
Okay. Carla, Sarah, any concerns?
No, I think just only thinking through, it's a one-year position, and in general, there's a shortage of school nurses, so thinking through what we need to do to sweeten the deal, so to speak.
Is there like a service that you can use, like a temp service? Or?
So this is I think when I was meeting with Tom and Sean, we talked through this of asking, what is it that Mary sort of feels that her department would need? And then also, how could we staff that? Mary's confident that we would be able to staff the float nurse position. She has a couple ideas in the pipeline, so I fully trust her with this, and we'd readjust if we have to, but it sounds like there's a couple possibilities.
You're basically going to be paying them more, but not giving them the benefits and stuff, so.
Depends on if you hire them if you're a contractor or full-time, right? So,
But, and people are willing to do that because of the upswing in salary, so to speak.
okay, so we're not gonna motion, but you have the unanimous approval.
Okay, I do.
All right, so we'll move forward with that.
Can I just say that I know we were throwing a lot of things around. I would like to see, I would like to see us do it within our budget without saying, oh, we can always ask the town, right? What can we do within our budget?
I mean, I think that's the number one, right, within our budget, counting the ESSA grants that we have within our budget, if we can fund it that way because of, late hires or other things, that would be great. But we do have, this would be something we could advocate for as well. I agree with you, ideally, we're funding it from ourselves. I think that's what we all would like to do, but we also have to make sure we're smart about the other opportunities we have as well.
Carla, after we gave Susan about 3 minutes to get her office set, we presented her with a set of dilemmas, and this was one of them. I can tell you Susan has already thought through different ways we could potentially fund this. So we just wanted to have the conversation tonight just to, first of all, publicly support our nurses, who we know are just doing so much work on behalf of our students and staff. Share the urgency around the need to think about other ways to potentially support and funding if needed, but also to express we are going to uncover every rock we can within our own budget to figure out ways that we can fund it too. So it's work that Susan's already done in conversations we've had.
Is that packet in the back of your welcome basket?
Okay, so now potentially moving on to the, a little bit more detailed conversation from a full-day kindergarten perspective. The packet had a lot of information that Holliston pulled together. It's almost a roadmap of sorts for us, if we want to. And if the numbers and the data aligns to our justification, I would start the conversation there with kind of what data do we need to support this advocacy? And we can start the brainstorming there, and I'll just keep taking notes. That's the question. What are the answers?
Well, number one, what's it gonna cost?
Okay. So forecasted costs.
Can I ask, what's our number this year? What's our percent of half-day? Anyone know?
It's like 90.
A percentage of
4%,
it.
right?
How many kids are in half-day K versus full day?
Okay. Yes, I have some numbers. We have a total of 237 students in full-day K. We have about 21 students who are also in full-day K who are there on financial assistance or receiving services through special ed, and 35 in half-day K.
So it's 9%.
So in total, there are 258 full-day K students and 35 half-day students.
And I think the data we don't have yet is how many students would we be meeting if this were to be full day,
correct.
which Holliston has, I think, organized very well in the packet, unless, I don't think we have that.
No, we don't have that data yet. I just captured what currently was happening in our district.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think part of the story as well is, a review of our peer communities and what their status is with respect to full-day K, right? I mean, that's sort of who we look to for, are we in line in terms of some of these major financial decisions? And some of this, again, is in the Holliston information, but the data around student outcomes and student success, as it relates to full day versus half-day K. The other thing that comes to mind for me is, and I don't know, this might be difficult to gather data on, but at least anecdotally, my sense is that fewer kids in the last year and a half and this year are in preschool than otherwise would have been, right? That's driven by job losses, that's driven by parents not wanting to send their kids to a preschool in the middle of the pandemic, all those sorts of things. And so I think that's probably an input as well when you think about the importance of having a full day K offering. Some of the elements in the Holliston materials that surveyed parents in terms of why they chose one or the other, or what their ability to absorb the costs are, would be important for us to know. And I think from a balanced perspective, and Carla, you were starting to go there earlier, I think, I'd also want to know, some of those 35 parents, 35 students whose parents have chosen half-day K for them, chose it not for financial reasons, but for other reasons. And we want to know that as well, given that, half-day K would almost certainly be off the table once we move to a free full-day K program.
Okay, so I caught review of peer communities and their status.
Yep.
Student outcomes, student success of FDK versus HDK students. Pre-K student drop-offs, and I'm going to put that as the number of pre-K student drop-offs due to COVID. And Jen, given our relationships with the local preschools, I'm hopeful you can help gather some information on that line.
Yeah, and I'd also like to add to that, the number of students that qualified for special education at the preschool level, because that was a significant increase.
Okay. All right, just going back to Sean's, then a parent survey, ability to pay, versus their choice, and then parent survey, other HDK reasons, why did they choose half-day kindergarten? Okay. I would add to the parent survey, is it, and it's maybe part of the ability to pay, or do we have more single-family incomes now? Because of COVID, people had to make a choice, stay home with the kids or others. I think that would be something we could directly tie as a COVID impact as well. It may not be a long-term implication, but it's definitely something that we could potentially gather as a data point, in terms of change in single versus double income families.
I would be curious, and I'm not exactly sure how this gets captured, but sort of piggybacking on what Jen was saying. Are the kindergarten teachers seeing an impact of the lack of preschool? Or, maybe some kids even went to preschool, but they weren't going 5 full days, which they would have done if it wasn't a pandemic. But are we just seeing lower skill base and social emotional development coming in compared to pandemic years?
So we could do that qualitatively, but you could also do it quantitatively to a degree with some of the data gathering and assessment tools we can use in that space, right? I don't know if we have enough history of some of our tools in that space necessarily yet to do a comparison.
Some of the tools we're starting this year would be their first year being implemented.
Some of them, yeah. I think there might be, so it might be more of a qualitative feel. Or we're looking back at old, say, Dibbles assessments. I know they used to do that way back in the day. There's not always a clear correlation necessarily, but it might be something that we can dig out. Okay?
But to be clear, I don't want our teachers doing
Yeah, do we,
assessments they wouldn't normally be doing.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah, do
trying
we
to put
really
more
need
work
to go
on
down into the
already
weeds
hardworking
on
people.
this?
I'm just
I
curious
mean-
if there's data that they're already collecting in some capacity that we could use for this.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't saying having them collect more data.
Yeah.
I was just saying
yeah.
that,
I
you know,
felt the need to clarify that.
it has to be compared to something, and
Yeah,
it may just be a qualitative comparison,
Yeah.
right? Not a quantitative comparison.
We should probably say out loud, at least my view of this exercise is this is, brainstorming, like in a perfect world with unlimited time, what would the story be that you would tell? As we get into it, we'll have to figure out what, where the data are available and where they aren't, or where the lift, the juice isn't worth the squeeze and that kind of thing. And so,
That's
you like that one? Now I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
Oh, we got your thoughts there. Carla, you were gonna say something?
I don't, I feel like we're like pushing and pushing and like just piling them up, and I don't know if it's quite necessary. I think, like you said, it's I don't know how in the weeds we have to get with this information to justify the need for it.
We at a very high level can justify the
Exactly.
need for this, I think.
I think we can. I think there's more from and maybe this is another one of the action steps, it's more from the payback portion of it that we don't have any justification of right now. That's where I think a lot of this data gathering is going towards, is what is the assessment of our kids that are in third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade now that were in full day versus half day, that will justify that we think we can save money by doing this, not just spend money, right? And I think to your point, Carla, I don't think we're necessarily saying who's doing this work yet. A lot of it they would have to because they have access to the data. But some of it, the survey, we could do. We can write up a Google Forms survey. They don't necessarily have to do it. We can pass it by them. Are we missing a question or anything else like that? But we could do it, right? And then do the analysis of the results thereafter. So I don't think we're necessarily saying who's going to do the work here yet. And peer communities, I think we can do a lot of that, right? We probably actually have a lot of it already from various different campaigns and other things that we've gone through, right? So, that's information that feeds into the process. Sarah, yes?
So I understand the conversation about the finances because we have to be fiscally responsible. What I'm thinking about is just what's valuable to our community and what families value in Reading. And thinking about the numbers of families we have that are paying is almost everyone. Not quite, but it's a large percentage of our families, which to me says that they understand what kindergarten is about and that having their child in school for a full day is essential to setting them up for success. And so, a lot of the data you might gather, a lot of students in Reading have had a full day kindergarten experience, but to me the difference is that the parents have been responsible for paying for that. And to me it speaks to who we are as a community. If we value early child education, we understand the importance of students having that full day kindergarten experience, us taking on that commitment as a district and not having that burden on our families who might have to make a choice financially, whether or not to, repair something on their home, buy a new vehicle they need, versus having their child come to kindergarten. So, I don't know that some of that data you're talking about would be available because of so many families making that sacrifice and paying for full day kindergarten. So the bulk of our students are already having that experience. I know that there are that percentage of students that aren't in full day. Certainly that I think would be a really valuable ability to look at how those students would perform differently. But it isn't as if most of our students are in half day and we'd be transitioning them to full day.
I totally understand that, and I totally agree with the community-related sentiment around it. There's the other portion of our community that has a different sentiment, though, that we have to make sure we address, right? We're not just here to represent the parents, we're also here to represent the rest of the community and make sure that they're aware of how their taxpayer dollars are being spent too. And we have to be very careful about that. And I think some of these data points are being asked of in particular because there have been studies in the past that show the impact of half day versus full day disappears in third grade. Whether that's a right study or not is a whole other conversation, but there have been studies that, from a universal perspective, that have said the real benefit disappears in third grade. If that's true or not, we can go through that argument, but that's why I wanted to make it a little bit more specific and palatable from a Reading community perspective, if we can. Now, that says the data might not be available, or it may not be appropriate. And if you think about all the changes that we've gone through, Aaron, I'll get to you in a second, the changes we've gone through from, MCAS to PARC, back to MCAS, to COVID year, to, the testing data may not be there to support it, right? And that's a big impact to a lot of that stuff. And that's just one piece of information. But I think we have to make sure we assess and address the whole community as part of the conversation as well. So Aaron, go ahead.
So I'm looking at our equity statement. To me, this is like one of our most egregious examples of inequity in the district. That to me is reason enough alone why we should be offering this to all students, regardless of what their families can pay, regardless of whether they're on an IEP or not, because it's the best educational model. And we have the research to support that. We have kindergarten teachers who've been reiterating that for years. And then the other piece, so there's equity, glaring. But to me, I think there's a huge social emotional piece, because so much of what the full day kids get is the socialization. Because our poor half-day students, not poor, but they have to get all the curriculum in the time that they're at school, because we're not allowed to offer more curriculum to the full day kids, right? They're getting the same curriculum, but they can get it, full day, they can get it at a slower pace, they can get it more divided. Half day, they've got to get it all in. So we know that lunchtime is happening, maybe additional recess is happening, maybe more stations and movement around the room are happening. You can't measure the impact of that, but we know that it's more beneficial for our kids to have that. So there are going to be things that we can't measure for the people who are going to be asking for us. To a certain point, we just have to be able to stand up and say, this is better for the students of Reading.
And I think we can do that. I'm not saying we can't. But if you think about it, Holliston measured a lot of those things. Now, maybe they were measuring it for the last 5 years, and that's why they're ready with this information, and we weren't, right? Which is, it is what it is, right? But a lot of this was very specifically measured by Holliston, where a lot of the ideas that we've just been talking about have come out. So the question is, can we, over a period of time, and it's not going to be by October 20th, build enough of that shows the correlation in Reading as well? And it may not be as crystal clear. Our community is a different community, right? But it may show enough of a efficacy perspective or enough of a justification in addition to what we know to be correct from an educational perspective. I'm not arguing the educational perspective, I just want to make that clear as well. I fully am behind full day K. I do think, though, that we just have to make sure we address the whole community as part of that conversation, not just the school community. Because ultimately, unless we can prove it's going to save as well, it means that there's a higher tax bill coming to somebody that may not be able to afford that higher tax bill. Then we have equity on the other side going the wrong way, right? So we have to think about it as holistically as possible as we go through it.
I totally get that, but the other thing I think we would be foolish to not bear in mind is if we're talking 4 to 5 years from now, we may be talking about an override regardless. Like, if we can make it 5 years without needing an override, awesome. But that would have been way longer than anyone predicted at this point. So there's a very real scenario in which no matter what, we need an override within the next 5 years.
I think it's a possibility, and it may be real. Reading has had a habit of being able to extend it longer than we ever thought we could. Whether we can do that again is a whole other story. But I don't want one of the reasons it gets voted down because half the community says no to full day K. I want to figure out how we make sure that that's not part of the argument, because we've covered that in some way, shape, or form.
I understand that. I also don't want that to be a reason like we don't do it
Yeah.
because we're afraid we're going to end up there when we may end up there.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to the actions or next step. Is there any other points of information people want to pull together? Full day K? Okay. Anything else on this side?
Do you feel like the committee has enough information on the academic rigor, the social emotional learning, the school routines that happen in kindergarten to understand the advantage of the full-day program for our students?
I think that's a great question, Sarah, and I think there's an assumption that everybody does know that, but I think we shouldn't go with an assumption. So a lot of the Holliston material also included specific article information on that front, but we should tie it back to ourselves as well. What are we doing? And I mean, to Erin's point, we're theoretically having to collapse all the same curriculum in a half day that we would cover in a full day. Is that actually happening? You know, I've seen different things over the years of what the schedule looks like for a half day versus full day, and are we covering as much science or as much social studies versus reading and math and all those things? It probably would be good to kind of show the difference. And you know what the science also says that kids need that break time, right? Well, they're not getting that in a half day K environment. So I think it would be good to pull together some of that information that's part of the compelling argument as well, and synthesize it to a degree as part of our argument. Okay, anybody else? No? Okay, so moving down the list then, the next one I had on the list was vocational education at the high school. What action steps or next steps do we want on that front? Carla, you tried to put it into a share instead of something physically happening here. That might be one of the first questions.
Well, like Tom said.
Yeah, I think this is a great one for, Mr. Tracy and I have been having many conversations about what it looks like to sort of move some of these ideas forward. So I think the first step would be for just me to follow up with him to see where he's at with things, to pick his brain a little bit, and see how ready he feels the community is to start to move some of these ideas forward. But this is one of those that, again, we don't know yet. We haven't done enough sort of landscape analysis to understand where is it that we are now, where's that we want to go, what are those things that would close the gap. So this is almost one we'd have to sort of put funding aside for that. So I think I'd rather just talk to Mr. Tracy first. And unfortunately, that doesn't really move things forward too fast, but I also don't know any other way to do it because there's not a clear path forward here. Yeah.
So then is the action then further discussions between the superintendent and the principal?
And team, yeah.
Go ahead, Craig.
It's not, so you're saying you wouldn't be looking for ARPA funds for that, or you would be? Because.
So I think this is work that we feel like we need to move forward in the high school eventually, but what it is, we don't exactly know yet. I think he wants to be able to meet with more families. I think we want to be able to better understand sort of what the current offerings are, what families feel like they want. So in an ideal world, would additional funding be set aside for us to explore this work? Yes, but I think that's it would be a harder, more vague sell for people to say, hey, these are the types of things we'd like to use it for. We don't exactly know what those types of things look like. Here's what they could be. So I share that to say, yes, ideally, this could be a part of the conversation, but it's a conversation we're going to have more holistically as we just look at our budget moving forward too.
Okay, so then that's an action, which is further conversations on that front, and it could be a 3-month, 6-month deliverable. It doesn't have to happen tomorrow, but at least that's something as the next step. Would you want to put the same thing for all the high school actions that are out there?
I think that makes sense, and I think I'm comfortable too asking Mr. Tracy just for an update on just where he sees these sort of updates for our next school committee meeting, which should still be before the financial forum. So then if there's any sort of things that we wanted to move into action or explore more, we could, but at least we then have a better understanding of how he sees things right now.
So that would then mean that covers vocational education, it covers pathway/opportunity expansion at the high school, and it covers dual enrollment. Right? Okay. So that leaves us with 3 more to discuss. The first of that is elementary tutors. The next is elementary literacy curriculum tools. And the third is supporting the kids in the middle. Who wants to start on any one of those in particular? Chuck?
So I have a question with the tutors. And I guess this is for staff. Is this something that you would kind of put in that same bucket as a nurse, something we need now or not?
I'll give first thought to Dr. Hardy or Dr. Stiles on that. And
So this year, we were able to add additional tutors at each of the elementary schools and both of the middle schools as part of some of the other grant funding. And so we're just in the process of placing people into those positions. I'm really eager to see the results that each school is kind of taking a little bit of a different approach as to how to use that person based on the needs of the kids in front of them. And so, I think when you talk to schools, having more support around tutoring is always welcome. But at the same time, I think we need to layer that support in a way that we know is going to be helpful and is going to actually support the different tiers of intervention that we need in our schools. So I'm really curious to see how the supports we've added in this year are going to support accelerating kids in their learning, making up for the differences in their education last year. So to me, it doesn't have the same level of urgency, but I certainly would be curious how other folks feel about that.
I agree with Dr. Hardy. I think we've put tutors in. I think we're talking about training they need and understanding reading instruction. How can they support our students? And I think hearing from our building leaders about the impact of that and really figuring out how do we track it and report out on it is really important versus just adding something that we're not sure is the most effective use of the funds.
Okay, so would it be fair to say that the action here is assess the success and impact of the new hires?
Yes.
Or maybe it's a 3 or 6 month type thing?
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else?
And that goes along with two other things that we have to do simultaneously is we're working on, which we'll talk about next time in our action steps, building out a better, more comprehensive sort of support, system for developing and supporting tutors, paras, people who step into roles, and we know we're directly working with students to make sure they feel supported in those roles. And also continuing to assess sort of what are the gaps that we are seeing with students who are, we don't even know yet when students coming back who have been impacted by the pandemic in different ways. So we're still trying to understand the impact of the pandemic on students academically, social, emotionally, and really where should we target sort of our efforts for tutoring and other interventions.
Sean?
Tom, my sense is that the full day K situation and the nurse need are sort of unique on this list in the sense that they are well-defined needs. We can measure sort of what the magnitude of the need is today. They are, to some degree, especially, full day K, but probably nursing degree as well, needs that probably existed before the pandemic, we feel like are being exacerbated as a result of it, right? So that's why we're having the discussion now. Whereas the rest of these, I think, including the ones we haven't gotten to yet, I think fit into this bucket of the true impacts of the pandemic on some of the things that these would address will not be evident for another year or two, potentially, right? And while I rarely give the federal government credit for executing well, I think one of the things that is is sort of good about the way that these funds are structured is, again, they don't have to be committed until 2024. And I think the reason that makes a ton of sense is that some of the things that come about as a result of the pandemic are not going to really be evident, thank you, or measurable, or the path forward isn't going to be clear for some period of time. And so it feels like we've got, a couple that we could sort of make relatively quick progress on, and then a bunch here that we're going to say, we've already sort of patched some holes where we anticipated that we might have some, and we need to see how that plays out, and we'll measure over time, and then probably, be in a place where we want to come back in, a year or 6 months or 18 months or whatever. And hopefully the town hasn't committed all of these funds yet at that point. So.
And there may be other things at that point,
That's right.
too.
That's right. Things we haven't anticipated yet, right?
Absolutely. Okay.
Especially the social, emotional areas.
Yep.
Great points.
Yep. Okay.
Dr. Stiles.
Dr. Stiles?
I just wanted to add to that. I think part of what we've been talking about as a team with the building leaders is really what is the impact of all of the funds we've already allocated in terms of social emotional, the positions we added at the high school level and at the elementary level, trying to give the principals more support at the elementary level, and they feel very strongly about needing some more administrative support. So what we put in, is it working? Is it enough? Do we need more, and where and why? And so we're having a lot of these conversations now. How do we collect the data to bring to all of you that would help drive some of those recommendations.
Okay. Is there anything anybody wants to bring up about the other two topics? The literacy curriculum and supporting the kids in the middle before we close down?
And I guess just in terms of, literacy, but also some of these other pieces we've identified that we know there likely will be a need. Is there something we want to say in the financial form about earmarking some funds for the year and a half ahead? So it's not, we don't just not bring it up as an identified need. We're not exactly sure what the specific need is with a specific value, but we anticipate needs in these areas: high school pathways, tutoring, early literacy.
We need to ask for all of them. This needs to be a Christmas list. We need to ask for everything in order, and then, so when Ed gives us our 90%, we're all set.
So what's our order?
Ed, do you want to, please? Name and street as usual, right?
So thanks. So Ed Ross, Kensington Ave, FinCom Chair. So I just wanted to, since you've been talking to me already, I would just give you some kind of real-time updates from our FinCom meeting. I know none of you, Chuck and Sean, we missed you in our meeting. But so just give you kind of a little bit of a real-time update, and a lot of it just kind of validates what you guys have already been talking about. So we did. In our meeting, kind of speak even specifically about some town meeting articles, and some of them actually had components of ARPA in them, and we actually, in some ways, kind of tabled some of that pieces of it, specifically, and just kind of finding some more flexibility as far as how we would fund, certain things even on the town side. So I bring that up just in light of, I think it was on the nursing, one that you brought up. Having that flexibility from a funding perspective, I think is key. And there's, again, you've all talked about it, there's, from a timing perspective, as long as it's identified, from what, Sharon mentioned, from a town accountant perspective, is that we'll be able to kind of still have that ability to be able to look back as well. So I think, having that, kind of flexibility in how you look at it, and if there's a way to be able to do it and have it be sustainable, obviously, I think that's going to be something that each constituent, kind of has to be able to, take into account. One of the things we did talk about, is, in the FinCom meeting is how we want to have this kind of thoughtful, and really want to be able to applaud all of you, again, for the organization, and, to be able to kind of put these thoughts together, start to prioritize them. While we do have time, there's also the adage that time is of the essence too. If there's things that we can identify, obviously, and be able to prioritize, I think that's going to be, be helpful. So one of the other things that kind of came out of there, and just something, kind of food for thought for you folks as well. One of the things that, that came out of that discussion is that we kind of asked Bob, is like, well, what do we have as far as like a template to kind of go off of? And I think you guys already know this, is that there really hasn't been something very specific. When you apply for a grant, it's for something very specific. So it wasn't this, kind of pool that you could kind of grab from and, and do something different with. But the one interesting thing he did mention was that there was a little bit more precedent, and Aaron, you kind of talked about it too, is when the override was done, that same type of community prioritization was done. And so I think that's a similar type of maybe thought process or template that we may want to be able to utilize. And, and one of the things we mentioned was, and I think you guys mentioned as well, is like doing different types of surveys and things of that nature as well. Again, because it is going to be looking kind of across the community, obviously, looking at, the schools and other, kind of populations within the town. So just wanted to be able to share, kind of that bit with you folks. Hopefully, we'll use the work that you guys are doing now and use the kind of the time wisely ahead of, October 20th at the forum, so we can have, probably some kind of more discussions and more thought around it too. Just wanted to be able to kind of share that. I don't know, and I'm happy to answer any other kind of questions. I don't know very much, but I can share with what I do know, today. But I think it's definitely something on, the minds of, kind of everybody, on the town side, staff, and then, on, from the select board side as well.
Carla, go ahead.
Ed, is there a discussion, or can you talk about a focus group?
We did. I mean, so we started to talk about it, and, and again, it's one of those things, I think, it's the, how you be able to put that together. And I think what we talked about in the meeting today is, is it something where we have folks from, the school committee, folks from select board, folks from FinCom, and then obviously have folks from, Sharon is, kind of vital to that, but also staff as well. So that where we start to kind of build a, kind of a coalition that, kind of covers off, kind of the whole community. So I think that's, kind of the little bit of a framework around it. And hopefully we'll have a little bit more, there was a little bit of homework we had on our side to, to kind of work and talk amongst ourselves and with Bob to kind of figure out how to structure that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Great, thanks, Ed. Okay, so then I think it's pretty clear from a priority perspective, we've more or less already done nurse staffing, but number 2 after that is full-day kindergarten, and then we'll figure out kind of the rankings after that as we go through it. And we'll conclude the discussion for now. The only other question I would ask is do we want to put names against some of these for the who? So that we know that that person or those people have the chance to start preparing some of the data appropriately against it. Some of this is probably relatively obvious, like forecasted costs. Sorry, Susan, it's probably you, right? And other things are pretty obvious, but I think let's just close the loop on that and see. For example, do we think we can even gather data for the impact of wraparound services for full-day versus half-day students?
We can dig in.
We could start digging in, okay. Sean, you were going to say something?
I was going to suggest, maybe rather than going line item by line item, I don't know if you were looking for somebody to sort of run point. This is obviously, as you know, been a sort of passion of mine for a number of years, and I did a lot of this research back in the day. I'd be happy to sort of run point and work with the administration on some of the data gathering and identify, which things we can and can't kind of get our hands on. A lot of these pieces are sort of external data that aren't, that doesn't have to be somebody in the administration tracking it down. And I'm very familiar with, a lot of the academic research and certainly the financial pieces, the comparisons to our peer communities. So I'd be happy to sort of raise my hand to kind of run point on pulling together the case with the support of the administration where it makes sense.
Okay. Does anybody else want to volunteer from a committee perspective? Okay.
If you need help, I'm happy to help.
I would be as well, but we'll go ahead and say, Sean, you'll run point on that one for us and working over here.
Sean, I think
with Sarah.
Sarah will be sort of our lead, and we'll all be working together behind the scenes. She can be the one to kind of get us together and work directly with you on that.
Perfect.
Okay. So those are our next steps then.
Yep.
Anything else before we close on this agenda item?
I'd like to thank just the conversation back and forth, and all the things that were elevated today are all things that are on our mind, whether it's part of the ARPA conversation or just part of the upcoming strategic planning cycle too. Please know that these are not things that will fall by the wayside if they sort of are not things that, bear fruit in the ARPA discussion. So just appreciate this conversation. Look forward to diving in throughout the year on this.
Okay. Great. So we have a pretty packed agenda on the 30th, but I'll probably put an agenda item on for the 14th of October just to kind of get an update prior to going into the financial forum. So we have some assessment of where we stand from a data gathering and preparation perspective, at least on that topic. And then we can maybe talk about prioritization of the other ones at that point in time as well.
Sure.
Okay. And if you and Mr. Tracy have an update on your stuff too, then we can have that as an input point too. Okay, so now moving on from that to our final order of business, do I have a motion?
I move to enter into executive session pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A7, to comply with or act under the authority of any general or special law or federal grant and aid requirements specifically citing to the open meeting law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 22, subsections F and G, not to return.
Do I have a second? Seconded by Carla. It's a executive session, so it's a roll call vote. Sarah? Aaron?
Aye.
Carla?
Aye.
Chuck?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Tom? Aye. So 6-0. We are adjourned, not to return.